Hey guys, today we're going to talk about something both terrifying and strangely cozy. The long frozen Russian nights when villagers, travellers, and occasionally unlucky nobles had to flee from packs of hungry wolves. It sounds dramatic, and yes, it was. Imagine being bundled in furs that itch like a badly washed sweater, trying to stay warm in a sleigh that bumps along a frozen road while the sound of paws on snow crunches behind you. The kind of story that makes your toes curl even though you're probably tucked under a blanket right now. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive this, at least not if you were actually there in 17th century Russia. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That way you can join me on more sleepy detours into history's less glamorous corners. And hey, drop a comment with your location and the local time. You'd be surprised how many people are drifting off in different time zones together. Now let's ease into this snowstorm of a tale. The first thing you notice is the sound snow crunching under frozen boots. It isn't the soft, powdery snow of a ski resort. It's the packed, squeaky kind that only deep winter produces. Russian winters are famous for breaking armies. Just ask Napoleon or Hitler, but long before those disasters, ordinary people were just trying to get home from the next village without freezing to death. You trudge forward, pulling your scarf higher around your face, and every breath crystallizes in the air. The rhythm of your steps becomes almost hypnotic, like a drum beat. In the silence of a forest blanketed by snow, that sound is everything. Historically, the Russian peasantry lived in wooden cabins called izbas, where the single warm spot was the stove-large brick and sometimes big enough to sleep on. People joked that the stove was the family's best member, always reliable, never complained, and always radiating warmth. You might be walking home after tending to livestock, or maybe after visiting a neighbour to borrow salt or share gossip. Either way, you're keenly aware that straying off the path could mean not just getting lost, but becoming part of the wolves' winter diet. Here's the quirky bit: wolves weren't the only danger on the roads. In some provinces, drunken coachmen pose just as much trouble as predators. There are tales of travellers climbing into sleighs with drivers so intoxicated they steered into rivers or ditches. So sometimes you'd ask yourself, do I risk the wolves, or do I risk sitting next to Ivan the perpetually tipsy? Not exactly a great set of options. And historians still argue about just how often wolves really attacked humans. Some claim the stories were exaggerated to explain missing villagers, or to add a scary thrill to long winter nights. Others point to parish records noting deaths by wolves in chilling detail. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Wolves were opportunists, not masterminds. They were more likely to pick off livestock, but hunger can push even a cautious animal to boldness. And in the endless Russian winters, hunger was as common as snow. You keep walking, boots stiff, breath puffing. The cold seems to bite deeper with every step, crawling under your clothes despite the layers. You think about how modern winter jackets have zipper synthetic insulation waterproof linings. Back then your choices were fur, wool, or more fur, and while it kept you alive, it also shed like a shedding husky in spring. Entire families would walk around covered in stray hairs, looking like they wrestled with a bear and lost. The sensory world around you sharpens the faint whistle of wind threading through trees, the distant groan of frozen branches bending under their own weight. Every sound feels amplified, and every shadow could be more than just a tree. You glance back, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes staring at you from the gloom. But it's only darkness, the kind that seems thicker than cloth. One mainstream fact: in the 18th and 19th centuries, Russia actually had official wolf hunts organised by the state, sometimes involving hundreds of hunters, beaters, and even soldiers. Wolves weren't just nuisances, they were considered threats to the agricultural backbone of the empire. If livestock was wiped out, people starved, and when people starved, uprisings brewed. Wolves, in other words, were indirectly political. Another strange tidbit: travellers sometimes tied jingling bells to their sleigh harnesses, not to be festive, but to scare wolves. Imagine Santa Claus's sleigh, except instead of ho ho ho, it's please, please, please don't eat me. The jingling carried through the still night air a metallic prayer against hungry jaws. As you walk, you realise the cold is a constant companion. Your eyelashes begin to freeze, and every blink feels like peeling Velcro apart. It makes you wonder how anyone could endure this daily, not just for a weekend camping trip, but Russian peasants did. They endured, they survived, and they passed down stories so chilling they became part of folklore. And right now, as you picture yourself trudging through that vast snowy expanse, with nothing but the crunch of boots, and the occasional whistle of wind, you realise the silence isn't peaceful at all. It's heavy expectant, like the hush in a theatre. Just before the curtain rises, something is waiting in the wings. But the sound that comes next isn't applause, it's the first distant howl. The howl swells and stretches a silver thread pulling tight across the night, and you stop mid-step without meaning to. It isn't one voice, but a braid, one call rising another, answering a third sliding between them. 500 paces, 1,000. The forest tricks your ears. Snow drinks small noises and throws the big ones back like stone on ice. You stand very still. The cold writes its alphabet on your cheeks and fingertips. Spruce boughs are chalked white, and the sky looks star-pierced enough to tear. There's a copper taste under your tongue. You've bitten your lip and a fleck of frost takes ownership. Far off, a bell taps the air, 1, 2, 3 muffled strikes that might be a church or a traveller's harness. You walk again because stillness is worse. The road is a pressed ribbon, 2 runner grooves where sledges passed a powdery crown between. Your boots slide, your breath pearls in little ghosts. The howl comes again, closer, not right behind you, but nearer than comfort, and you picture yellow eyes in the dark. Here's a mainstream historical fact to carry well into the 18th and 19th centuries. Provincial authorities kept records of wolf depredations and organised Zimnia oblovi, winter drives where villagers, hunters, and sometimes soldiers formed rings to push wolves towards shooters. It wasn't casual sport. It was policy backed by bounties in coin or kind. A dead wolf might buy flour or salt, or the privilege of being a little less hungry for a week. Now, a quirky tidbit, some travellers carried a small pouch of dried fish skins not as food but as emergency distraction. Toss a few behind you, the logic went, and a hungry animal might pause to sniff and gnaw, buying your legs precious seconds. It's the medieval version of throwing snacks at your problems. Scholars still argue whether wolves in Russia habitually targeted humans, or mostly took livestock and carrion. Parish registers list deaths by wolves, yet skeptics suggest such entries compress a mess of circumstances: injured travellers, children far from watchful eyes, bodies found too late to know which teeth were first. Environmental historians add that deforestation and famine might have pushed packs to risky behaviour. The data shivers, the stories stride. The howls shift to barks, then to a silence like a curtain. You keep your pace steady because panic burns fuel and fuel is warmth. Your mittens, thick and woolly, smell sweetly of sheep. Frost grows on the hairs as if your hands were turning into small winter animals. To your right, an ice-cracked stream coughs. Water moves under it like a rumour. You try a modern aside. This is like working the graveyard shift, literally. Clock in at dusk, clock out at maybe. You imagine asking your supervisor for a wolf-free route and receiving a pamphlet on positive thinking. You grin. The grin freezes. Winter has notes about humour, keep it brief. Your thoughts turn to sleighs, not because you have one, but because you wish you did. A sleigh is speed, and speed beats teeth. Runners sing on hard snow, and horses throw steam like dragons that forgot their fire. Travellers often lashed bells to the harness, a moving lighthouse of jingle that said, "I am here and moving quickly. Please reorganise your dinner plans." Bells also kept drowsy drivers awake. You remember a village story, a merchant crossing a frozen river at dusk, his sleigh piled with rye. A dark ribbon spread ahead, open water thin as a finger hidden under powder. The horse balked. The merchant snapped the reins until he heard a low growl from the bank. The horse had been listening to a better teacher. He unhitched, walked upriver to the marked crossing stones, and made it home with less pride but more years. Wind fusses with your scarf. On the path ahead, a set of tracks appears, 4-toed prints, direct registering the hind neatly stepping into the front. The stride is economical, like someone counting coins. You crouch, mitten hovering. Warmth rises through the wool, eager to touch anything. You straighten. Twigs tick, a raven croaks, and the forest edits itself back to quiet. Another fact surfaces: some provinces dug wolf pits, deep, steep-sided holes baited with offal, and roofed with flimsy lattices of sticks and snow. Effective but dangerous. People and livestock fell in too. Over time, the practice waned as firearms and organised drives proved steadier tools. Caution lingered. Children were warned not to wander. Herders carried iron-tipped staffs, and songs about the woods kept a careful rhythm. You walk, and you listen. Tonight's motif is sound, wind-plucking, fir needles, the squeal of boot leather, the tiny fizz of ice on your lashes. Every so often you hum, not because you need a tune, but because a human voice can make a bubble of courage the size of a breath. You pick something your grandmother sang over rising dough, a lullaby about geese or debt. The trees thin. Ahead, the road lifts over a low rise where the moon scratches a path across the snow. Beyond it, there should be a boundary marker, a carved post with a peaked cap, and a burned line showing where one parish keeps its people, and another begins to try. Boundary posts promise other humans fire's soup jokes that melt on the tongue. You angle your shoulders against a fresh gust and climb. At the crown of the rise, you stop not for sound, but shape. Down the slope in the road's left runner lies a dark heap like a lost coat. The moon sketches it. The snow around is scuffed and pitted, not bloody, thank every passing saint, but stirred, the way flour looks after kneading. Your skin tightens as if trying to make you smaller. 3 careful steps, then 3 more. The heap resolves into a bundle of brushwood tied with twine neatly, almost primly. A second bundle lies 10 paces beyond. Between them, light prints stipple the surface. Small paws, many of them, and the efficient straight lines of creatures that don't waste. You back up a single step very slowly the way you would from a conversation you'd rather not have. Behind you in the trees you just left the bell strikes again, no church then, but metal moving with a harness, a traveller coming along the same ribbon of road. Company can be salvation, it can also be variables. Wait and join them, or press on for the boundary post, avoiding introductions and extra noise. The night breathes unimpressed by your decision tree. Because historians like tidy ledgers, you recall a dispute: did people truly walk alone at night this often? Or are we flattering ourselves with a theatre of bravery? Diaries suggest prudence most waited for daylight or groups, yet necessity makes strange schedules. A cow doesn't check the moon. A child's fever ignores the calendar. You're not heroic here, you're simply required. You make your choice surprised by how ordinary it feels. But at the bottom of the slope, the glimmer you notice is not a lantern at all. It moves side to side, too low for a human hand and too smooth for a horse. But the next duty was even stranger. The glimmer slides left, then right low to the snow, as if a cautious star decided to skate. You crest the last of the slope and see the truth of it. A lantern lashed to the side of a peasant sleigh, its flame wagging in the wind like a sleepy tongue. The sleigh moves at a reasonable trot, no heroic dash, no postal gallop, just the hard-working pace of a horse that knows the distance home better than its owner. The runners sing that faint iron-on-ice note, and every so often the wooden body answers with a throaty creak the sound furniture makes when it remembers the tree it used to be. You lift a mitten, and the driver spots you. He slows, lifts his own arm thick as a log in a padded sheepskin, then calls out something you can't quite hear because snow swallows consonants. When you draw alongside, every smell introduces itself: horse breath, damp leather, a thread of wood smoke caught in the wool, and that iron scent of coal that sits at the back of your throat and refuses to leave. The sleigh's bed is lined with straw and patched furs. A basket is wedged in the corner, the lid cinched down with twine as if someone had told the twine a scary bedtime story. You climb in because walking is brave, but riding is smart. The driver clucks to the horse and the world begins to scroll. The lantern licks light across snowdrifts, throwing long, patient shadows that blink when the sleigh hits a rut. It's not fast, this movement, but it's movement with a plan. Wood, leather, iron, breath, your new motif is a little orchestra, and you get the good seat. Mainstream historical fact time in much of Russia, especially from late autumn through early spring, sleigh travel wasn't a festive novelty. It was the backbone of transport. Roads clogged with mud in summer became firm in winter, and when rivers froze they turned into what people jokingly called imperial highways, zimnicky seasonal routes that could carry postal troika's tax collectors, traders and families. The imperial yam system relay stations with fresh horses and drivers didn't exist for romance. It existed because snow, for all its teeth, could be faster than dirt. Peasants, too, leaned on sleighs to move firewood, grain and people. Wheels were opinions, runners were policy. You tuck your feet under the straw and feel warmth creep back into your toes like shy cats returning to the hearth. The driver, his beard frosted to a philosophical grey, tells you his name is Semyon, and that the lantern is an old friend with a small appetite. He taps the bell arch over the horse's collar. The bells answer with a tired chime, not jolly at all, just practical like a clerk stamping documents after midnight. Bears sleep. Semyon says wolves don't. Bells talk to both. His smile is thin but present as if carved by a careful knife. Quirky tidbit to pocket on long winter rides, some travellers carried heated bricks wrapped in cloth to serve as foot warmers. You'd bake them in the oven just before departure, tuck them under the straw, and pretend your life was a story about luxury. If you didn't have bricks, potatoes stood in as understudies, baked wrapped and later eaten when the heat had gone out of them and into you. It's the 18th century version of a rechargeable hand warmer, except you can make soup afterward. Speaking of soup, Semyon reaches beneath a fur and produces a tiny lidded pot. Inside frozen cabbage soup, a perfect edible paperweight. He wraps it with a spoon. It rings like a little bell. For later, he says, when we're rich. You pass a copse of pines where the snow has stacked in careful layers, each drift edged like a butcher's apron. The horse's ears swivel, then relax. Your shoulders follow suit. The sleigh's groove feels like a promise you sit in it, you're carried. For a sleepy moment you imagine the road as a river, and the sleigh as a boat. The snow has waves. The wind serves as the ocean's chorus. Somewhere beyond the tree line an owl speaks 5 soft syllables to a mouse, and the mouse hangs up. Semyon keeps the pace steady the way skilled drivers do when the road shines like glass. He tells you he greased the runners at dusk with a smear of animal fat and a hint of resin, a home formula that smells faintly of campfires and market days. Another joke, gentle. In town they sell fancy wax, he says. Costs enough to make a wolf weep. You laugh, which fogs the lantern glass for a heartbeat. Historians still argue about details that matter to people who owned more ink than sheep. How common were private sleighs among the poorest peasants? Some archival lists suggest a single village sled could be shared among families with priority rotating like a saint's feast day. Others point to probate inventories where even modest households counted a small sanny sledge among their necessities patched and repatched, the way boots live 9 lives. Economic historians knit their brows over regional differences. Forest-rich provinces built more steps, depended on neighbours and river villages, timed trips to the freeze. The debate isn't academic when you're sitting in straw. It's about whether your ride tonight is luck or logistics. You nudge the conversation to safety because you are after all trying not to be dinner. Semyon raises an eyebrow. Wolves chase sleighs, yes, but not every night. They are mathematicians counting risk, counting reward. He taps the side of the basket. Meat. No. He taps your mitten. Fur only if it walks badly. You think you might embroider that on a pillow. He tells a story because every driver keeps a library of them about a winter caravan, 3 sleighs, 2 drivers, 1 priest, who had decided not to be interesting that day. They had jingle bells, iron-tipped poles, and for reasons lost to time, a sack of dried fish skins. When a pack paced them at a careful parallel, the priest began tossing skins into the dark like a miser, making charitable donations he could afford. It worked for half a mile. Then the wolves formed a new opinion about the dataset. The drivers picked up speed, the bells spoke sternly, and the pack calculated wind against hunger. We arrived, Semyon says, with fewer snacks, but more priest. You decide mathematicians are indeed flexible. A modern aside creaks into your head. This is Commute Culture Snow Edition. Somewhere someone in a warm office is presenting a slide deck titled Key Performance Indicators for Not Being Chased by Wolves, and all the charts are just lines heading in the correct direction away. You imagine a quarterly bonus for bells well timed and lanterns properly trimmed. HR sends out a memo if you hear howling report to the nearest boundary post. The sleigh slides onto a frozen river. You feel it in your bones, the way the surface changes from packed road to something that hums more deeply. Ice groans a low conversational note, and the horse shortens its stride in respect. Here the lantern's reflection doubles the light, and a scatter of stars stutters at your feet. Semyon steers toward the centre where the freeze is usually thickest. On the bank, willow branches script thin black punctuation against the snow. Every 3rd sentence is a semicolon, every 4th is a hush. Another fact floats up like breath in towns authorities sometimes regulated bells on troikas. Postal sledges had distinct chimes, and urban bylaws in certain places limited their use at night to avoid turning streets into sleepless jingling operas. Yet other sources celebrate bells as public safety audible right of way. The sources argue, the sleigh proceeds. You and Semyon occupy the historical footnote, which is to say, the human middle. He checks the river with practiced eyes, dark pools, to avoid rippled patches of snow that mean roughness. Underfoot a scatter of reed tops that hint at shallows near the far bend. He tells you about boundary markers he trusts more than maps, the leaning pine that looks like a drunk uncle, the boulder shaped like a loaf, the homestead chimney that coughs exactly at dusk. Maps are polite, he shrugs. Land is honest. The lantern flickers as a gust wriggles down the riverbed. Your scarf lifts and settles. You tuck it tighter, and that's when you hear a new sound, not a howl, not bells, not the philosophical groan of ice, but the quick, neat clicking of claws on hard surface, as if someone were typing a very confident letter behind you. Semyon's hand, resting on the reins, goes very still. The horse's ears pivot back. The sleigh's shadow leaps, and then behaves. He doesn't turn the lantern, he doesn't have to. He knows the grammar of this noise, and so do you now that your heart is standing up. The clicking becomes a rush, then breaks into two streams, one closer, one fanning wide across the river, measuring you like tailors with tape. Semyon breathes once deep and the horse gathers itself. The bells speak in a new tense, urgent declarative. Your fingers find the edge of the sleigh. The wood is smooth as a plain. The river is a highway, yes. Highways invite company. But the next duty was even stranger. The rush behind you sharpens into geometry, two lines angling to bracket the sleigh a third, holding to your wake as if reading your footprints like a menu. Semyon doesn't whip the horse. He does something subtler, leaning his weight and speaking in a low, pleased tone, convincing the animal that speed is its own warm blanket. You burrow deeper in the straw until your knees find a patch that feels like the inside of a mitten, which as it happens is the theme you can't escape for wool and the itch that loves you more than most relatives. Your world becomes a collage of textures. The felted boot tops Valenki press against your shins with the stubborn affection of old dogs. Your kota-shuba that once belonged to a sheep with career ambitions rubs a line of static across your neck. The scarf scrapes your lips with tiny ice crystals that somehow feel like sand, each grain a cool exclamation. You tug your hood down, and the edge leaves a signature on your forehead, a red crescent that will be the only fashionable thing about you for miles. This is Russian winter couture, warm, practical and hostile to compliments. If there's a runway, it's a frozen river. If there's applause, it's the sound of your breath not quitting. Mainstream historical fact to anchor you by the 18th and 19th centuries. Winter dress across the empire leaned on layered wool and fur linen shirts, and portianki foot wraps next to the skin, long kaftans or zipuns, then heavy shubby overall. Felted wool boots, Valenki became near universal in the interior, perfect for dry cold, disastrous in slush, which is why leather galoshes sometimes rode on top like little boats. In the far north, and among reindeer herders, the Malitsa fur turned inward made a portable weather system. The felt hats and later ear-flapped caps weren't invented to look adorable. They were engineered to keep ears attached to faces. You layered like a cabbage with opinions are dressed exactly as a statistic would recommend. Quirky tidbit to keep your spirits lounging. Some households slipped dried hay or birch bark into boots as insoles, trading a little noise for a lot of insulation your footsteps would whisper like a summer field hiding in winter shoes. Others smeared exposed skin with goose fat or bear grease before long rides, a trick borrowed from hunters and grandmothers who distrust frost. The sheen made you gleam like a pastry and smell faintly festive. Wolves, contrary to rumour, do not prefer croissants. Scholars still argue about the spread and timing of Valenki. Were they already common among peasants by the early 18th century, or did production scale later with urban workshops? Probate lists and travel accounts disagree, sometimes talking past each other like old friends with new hearing aids. Ethnographers point to regional wardrobes the same latitude could dress differently depending on forest steppe or trade routes. The debate matters because warmth isn't abstract here. It's the difference between I remember that trip and someone else remembers me. You sink your hands deeper into your mittens, which are less gloves than sheep-shaped apartments. The wool is rough honest. You could strike a match on it if you had a match and a life philosophy that welcomed fire near your hands. Frost feathers along the seams hopeful, then melts back as your pulse negotiates rent. Your cheeks tingle where the scarf lets breezes visit, and each breath smells faintly of lanolin and horse, a farmhouse perfume with notes of survival. Behind you, claws tick again on the ice, then soften into the hush of paws on windblown powder where the river has drifted. The pack is studying you like a ledger assets liabilities risk. Semyon lifts the bell arch with 2 fingers. The chime brightens a little lawsuit filed against the darkness. Hold the basket, he says, and you do because you were raised to be helpful. You can't help thinking of fabric history while being audited by carnivores. Linen undergarments washed and beaten till they forgive you. Wool spun at hearths where stories also turned. Fur cured in courtyards that smelled like both wealth and work. Clothing wasn't a closet. It was a family project. Even the thread twisted between thumb and forefinger remembered every hand that made it. You think of your scarf as a quiet chorus of grandmothers. You also think a small, unprintable thought about the mitten's itch, which you rephrase as committed texture. Semyon grunts, pleased with the horse's rhythm. Clothes are maps he says to the air or to you or to the horse that clearly speaks 3 languages. You wear the place you come from. He nods at your Valenki. Dry cold, good. River thaw, bad. City people learn that lesson once. He raises one mittened hand, showing a patch sewn with thread a different colour from the rest. My wife says it keeps me from vanishing into the snow. You would compliment the design, but your teeth are currently on strike. A breeze knife sideways, sliding under your hood with the accuracy of a tax collector. The motif for these minutes is touch and wind touches everything with equal rights. Eyes, ears, the thin skin over your knuckles. You flex your fingers and feel the mittens become small saunas. Steam ghosts through the wool. The horse's hide ripples under harness. The sleigh slurs left and then recovers the runners, scribbling an opinion across the ice. A joke lands in your head, soft as straw. This outfit would destroy during Fashion Week. Provided Fashion Week relocates to a field in January and replaces champagne with beet soup. You almost say it aloud. The scarf edits you. Another fact pads up to sit at your heel. Much winter labour happened indoors around the hearth, spinning, mending, carding, storytelling. But the road still demanded errands and obligations that cloaks couldn't cancel. Parish bells marked daily rhythms even through muffled snow. You could hear the Angelus as a softened heartbeat and know it was time to stir the pot, stoke the coals, or cross yourself before stepping into night. Bells weren't only wolf repellents. They were village clocks time-stitched to sound. The one Semyon carries has a shabby dignity. It says both make way and please don't be interesting. The wolves test a new angle, shadowing along a bank where reeds comb the wind. One slips ahead a grey paragraph against the darker paragraph of trees. You find that you can appreciate their efficiency and still not wish to join their calendar. The horse breathes steadily a metronome with hooves, and the sleigh's creak becomes a lullaby with opinions about friction. Your mind tugs at another scholarly thread. How much fur did peasants really wear given cost and availability? Some sources emphasise sheepskin and coarse wool for common folk, with fox, sable and marten reserved for those who measured time in coin. Others note that repair and reuse were arts. A garment could live 3 lives, wedding finery, winter coat, child's lining, before it became a patch, then a rag, then perhaps a wick. No one threw heat away. You stroke the seam at your elbow, and under the new thread you feel older stories hiding stitches nested like Matryoshka dolls. Semyon gestures toward the right bank where a stand of birches frets against the sky. Cutting place there, he murmurs. Brushwood piles. You think of the neat bundles you saw earlier tied like sleepy soldiers. People leave them by the road, he adds, for stoves, for kindness, for trade. He shrugs. Wolves like the smell. Mice too. The world queues for winter. The sleigh noses off the river at a place where the bank sinks low and kind. The runners bite at hard-packed snow and then sing a different pitch on the road's old bones. Trees close in. The wind calms, replaced by a slow sift of powder, falling from higher branches, a white confetti with no band. Here sound changes costume. The bells become conversation. The horse's hooves a careful thesis. The wolves, if they follow, must filter through trunks and shade. You recenter in your clothes. The itch becomes familiar, then oddly comforting, as if your body needed proof of its borders. The hood is a private room, the scarf a door you can open a finger's width at a time. You think with an affection that surprises you of the oven-top beds in peasant izbas where people slept like cats on a shelf, wearing shirts to bed that doubled as daytime armour. Heat was not a thermostat. It was architecture. A small shared laugh with yourself somewhere far away, people pay for cold plunges and talk about wellness. Here, wellness is when your eyelashes don't clink. You decide to charge extra for every breath that stays inside your lungs. The road rises, and at the top of the small hill you see it, the boundary post peaked cap frosted like a tiny church, its charred stripe warning and welcome both. Relief moves through your layers like a man warming his hands from the outside in. On the far side lies the next parish, a village with chimneys and opinions and possibly soup. The wolves' clicking retreats for a handful of heartbeats. You taste hope and find it crunchy. Semyon slows the horse not to rest but to listen. He tilts his head, and you do too. Beyond the post, in the shallow hollow where the road levels, a dull orange glow stains the snow. Fire lanterns, a cart's charcoal brazier. The light isn't steady. It wavers, dims, then licks higher as if someone is feeding it by handfuls. The scent slides in smoke, resin, a sweetness that whispers of pine and urgency. Bonfire, Semyon says softly, brows knitting frost. But who keeps it there and why now? He lifts the reins, just enough to make the bells clear their throats. The horse answers with a cautious squared-off step. You ease the basket to the floor of the sleigh and pat the itchy tops of your valenki as if they were brave, which they are. Your clothes hold you together like a committee reaching consensus. The glow ahead brightens a shade and the road narrows into an opinion you'll have to meet. But the next duty was even stranger. The bonfire glows as though the snow itself has been persuaded to burn. At first it's a smear of colour in a landscape that usually tolerates only black-white and the occasional sky blue. But as the sleigh crests the hill and begins its descent, you see it clearly, a tall stack of brushwood arranged like an overambitious birthday candle flames, whipping in the wind, sparks leaping upward as if eager to join the stars. The light licks the undersides of the surrounding pines, turning their snow-laden boughs into chandeliers trembling above the road. The horse slows without needing Semyon's command hooves sliding into a cautious trot. Fire has its own authority. Animals respect it even when men forget to. The bells on the harness strike a nervous rhythm, less festive now, more like a question asked repeatedly with no reply. You pull your hood tighter and your mittens smell faintly of singed wool memory rather than present. The heat of the fire has not reached you yet, but the sight alone is enough to thaw imagination. Here is your historical anchor. Bonfires were often kindled at crossroads or along main routes in the dead of winter, not for celebration but for survival. Villagers tended them during wolf drives, using the flames as both beacon and barricade. Hunters and peasants would funnel wolves into rings of fire where shouts, spears and gunshots finished the plan. Sometimes those smaller fires were left burning near roadsides simply to deter hungry packs from harassing late travellers. A blaze was both signal and shield, a language in flame. Now for the quirky tidbit, in some regions, people tossed resin-coated pine cones into roadside fires to produce loud, crackling pops, claiming it frightened wolves more effectively than steady flame. Imagine the medieval equivalent of fireworks, night tiny booms punctuating the dark, making predators pause, while peasants grinned and children clapped mittened hands. Did it work? Maybe. Did it feel like it worked? Absolutely. And sometimes that was enough. Scholars debate whether these bonfires were widespread public safety measures or more occasional acts of desperate improvisation. Some chronicles describe systematic winter patrols lighting them, while other evidence suggests such accounts may be inflated, folklore emphasizing community solidarity in a land that was often far too scattered for such organization. Environmental historians note that wood was valuable. Setting it on fire just to scare animals might have seemed wasteful unless the threat was truly acute. Yet the stories endure, which suggests at least some truth flickered in the flames. As the sleigh edges closer, you notice figures near the fire, 3, perhaps 4. Their silhouettes bend and straighten, feeding logs, adjusting poles, stamping feet. Their voices come faint, tugged thin by the wind words you can't pass, but tones you can half practical, half ritual, as though they're working and praying at the same time. Semyon exhales frost through his beard and mutters, "Good men, I hope." His horse snorts in agreement or skepticism. It's hard to tell. The sleigh halts at the fringe of the fire's reach. Heat washes against your face, sudden as a slap after so much cold. It prickles your cheeks, makes your eyelids heavy. Your breath fogs less dramatically here, and you realize how quickly comfort can betray vigilance. Semyon climbs down snow crunching and calls out a greeting. The men answer with short phrases, laconic Russian syllables that clatter like stones. One waves, another squints at you, his eyes reflecting orange. Closer now, the fire roars like a sermon. Sparks lift and vanish, brief pilgrims to the sky. You smell resin pine tar smoke so thick it knits your scarf tighter. The men by the blaze are dressed like you wool fur patches, but their faces look carved by different years. One stirs the fire with a long pole tipped in iron, the kind usually reserved for ovens. Another holds a musket resting casually against his boot. The third is younger hair, barely frosted, tossing branches with too much enthusiasm. A fourth sits on a log, silent eyes, scanning the dark beyond the fire line. He is listening for the same sounds you've been fleeing. Semyon leans toward you and whispers, "Travellers may be patrol. Maybe. Just men with wood." He doesn't finish the thought. The horse tosses its head. Bells jingle a warning. The wolves haven't given up. You can feel them in the rhythm of the night, a pressure at the edges of light. Fire deters, but hunger argues. A modern aside slips into your tired head. It's like waiting at a gas station in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m, when you can't quite tell if the other customers are friendly, locals, fellow travellers, or the kind of people who make documentaries later. The fluorescent lights hum instead of fire crackling, but the feeling half safety, half suspense is the same. One of the men by the blaze gestures at the sleigh and points to the ground, an invitation to circle closer. Semyon shrugs, reins slack in his hand. "Warm horse," he says softly. You realise he's right. The animal's flanks are steaming breath, wheezing like a forge. Rest would be mercy. You nod, though the decision isn't yours to make. As the sleigh draws near the bonfire, the heat becomes almost uncomfortable, a fever after long illness. You shed your hood back an inch, and suddenly your ears feel both liberated and raw. The fire's voice is hypnotic, its rhythm competing with your pulse. Every snap of resin is a small warning, every sigh of smoke a lullaby. Another historical note: during particularly harsh winters, peasants sometimes gathered communally around large bonfires, not just for safety, but for warmth, when fuel in individual households ran low. These events blurred into folk tradition songs, dances, prayers, creating a rare moment of festivity in landscapes otherwise dominated by survival. Fire was always more than function. It was culture, a shared performance against the dark. The young man tosses another branch onto the blaze, and a fountain of sparks jets upward. For an instant you think you see eyes glittering in the tree line, too many, too symmetrical. Then the wind shifts, smoke drifts, and it's only your imagination rehearsing old fears. But the silent man on the log tightens his grip on his staff, and you wonder whose imagination is more accurate. Heat, cold, shadow light the road has become a stage. You sit very still, mittens pressed to your knees, listening to wolves that may or may not exist, and men who may or may not be allies. The fire crackles, your breath slows, and for the first time tonight you almost believe in warmth. But the next duty was even stranger. You don't notice the dog at first, because the fire takes all the attention, painting everything in quick orange strokes that make even snow look warm. Then a shape unglues from the shadows behind the seated man, a rangy, rough-coated dog with a fox's face and a tail like a question mark. It steps into the light ears, pricked paws lifting high from the crust the way experienced paws do. The eyes fix on you, then on the horse, then on the woods beyond priority order established in a glance. The dog exhales, and a small plume ghosts from its nose like a tiny steam engine that believes in duty. Smell becomes the evening's new motif: smoke and pine resin, hot iron and wet leather. The sour, sweet tang of horse sweat, the comforting animal musk of dog fur drying by heat. Even the snow has a smell. When it's this cold, a faint metallic cleanliness like iron and distant apples. The dog's snout sifts it all, reading paragraphs you can't see. You can almost hear the index flipping in its head. Fox earlier. Rabbit maybe. Wolves definitely. The younger man whistles softly and the dog comes to heel. Except heel is too fancy a word for the practical geometry it chooses. Stationing itself not at his leg, but 5 paces out, slightly off the road, exactly where the fire's glare fades into usefulness. Guard dogs make their own footnotes. You watch it triangulate warmth, wind and horizon, until all 3 agree to cooperate. Mainstream historical fact first to anchor your admiration across northern Russia and Siberia. Spitz-type Lycas, Karelian West, Siberian East Siberian. Their cousins and local variants were the backbone of hunting and homestead defence from at least the early modern period onward. Upright ears, dense coats, curved tails, and a genius for cold made them as common around izbas as ovens and icon corners. A good laker could tree sable, hold a boar at bay, warn of bear and patrol a yard with a seriousness that shamed idle humans. In winter, when wood smoke and hunger braided through the countryside, dogs were both doorbells and security contracts you paid in scraps and praise. Quirky tidbit because practicality likes to wear funny hats. Some villagers swore by spiked leather collars for their yard dogs, not for fashion, but to turn a wolf's grip into a regret. Others rubbed the dog's ruff with tar or even a little ground pepper before night, watch an aromatic do not disturb sign reputed to confuse a predator's nose. There are also tales of hanging tiny bones or jingling bits of metal from a yard line, so the slightest tug raised an alarm dog, and metal-making duet homegrown early warning systems that required exactly 0 batteries. Scholars still argue about how often such dogs truly deterred wolf attacks versus how often they simply transferred danger onto themselves. Parish reports list beloved yard guardians lost to wolves in winters of famine. Memoirs in turn celebrate dogs whose noise alone kept packs skittish. Ethnographers warn that memory is generous to heroes with wagging tails, while environmental historians note that a determined pack or a rabid individual could tear through a homestead defence like wind through thatch. The debate isn't aimed at dogs, no one doubts their loyalty. It's aimed at our tendency to turn every bark into a miracle and every loss into legend. You crouch and hold out a mitten. The dog considers the offering as if you were applying for a position, and it were HR. After a grave sniff, it grants provisional friendship by lowering its head into your palm, a weight that feels like a signature. Heat passes from muzzle to wool, and for a heartbeat your hand believes it's summer. You murmur nonsense, which is universal dog for, and the ears flick in approval. Semyon and the older man exchange the quick accounting of travellers, where from where to what scene. You contribute the truth that matters a pack shadowing the river disciplined enough to fan and bracket. The men glance at one another, not surprised so much as confirmed. The seated watcher lifts his chin toward the dark. They'll test the fire, he says. They always do after a lean week. He pats the log beside him, invitation and instruction. Sit where the smoke confuses your smell. The Leica pads a half-circle, stops and huffs softly toward the trees. Somewhere out there, snow whispers as something waits it and then releases it. The flames throw a ladder of light across the road. Nothing climbs it. You feel the dog's vigilance like a wire stretched from its ribs to your sternum, pulled taut and humming. Bells on the harness offer a modest counter-melody, their bright tin voices speaking administrative clarity to the night. This is a sleigh. This is not prey. Please consult your hunger about alternative options. You share a joke, quiet and thin at the edges. We're staffed for security tonight, and the younger man grins. Humour is a spice. You sprinkle carefully in this kitchen. He tugs the dog's ear with 2 fingers. Name's Rajab, he says. Speckles. Up close you see the flecked white on the chest like a handful of snow that decided to stay. Rajab seems unconcerned with his branding and resumes the harder work of being a nose. The older man reaches into a sack and brings out something that looks like a crumbling brick. Klebnaya korochki, he says, hard bread crust, and flips a piece toward Rajab, who catches it politely and chews with the attention of someone passing a contract. You remember reading that hard bread warmed by a fire or a pocket was travel gold. In a pinch people softened it with hot water, and a pinch of salt inventing soup from stubbornness. Dogs got their share, not out of sentiment alone, but because a barking stomach is a quieter yard. Another fact pads in beside the first. In many districts, household inventories treated dogs as property. The way they listed axes and kettles, functional companions, not pets in the modern sofa-based sense. Yet folktales and proverbs reveal affection woven through the ledger lines, the dog that waits. The dog that warns the dog who, when fed, last remembers first. In winter you love what watches while you sleep. Wind edges around the fire's dome like a curious stranger who wants to hear the story without buying a drink. Smoke slides low for a minute and then lifts. Eyes water and clear. Your nose catalogues heated pitch. The horse's honest stink-singed hair, yours wet wool, and somewhere behind it all the faint meat sweet of old bones in the forest. You wish your senses lied more convincingly. The dog wishes everyone would pay attention. Scholarly debate taps your shoulder again. We'll organise village night watches with dogs. A common practice, or do a handful of well-documented communities distort our picture? Some researchers point to bylaws and parish fines for households that fail to keep yards patrolled, implying communal expectations. Others argue these texts represent pious ideals rather than daily enforcement in scattered hamlets, where distance and fatigue ruled. Diaries from foreign travellers are the wild cards, half astonished, half patronising. They note Russian dogs that never seem to sleep, and Russian men who pretend to. Whose eyes should you trust across centuries, the neighbour who had chores, or the visitor who had ink? The younger man asks almost shy if your sleigh carries scraps. Semyon shakes his head. Only cabbage for tomorrow's optimism, the men chuckle. You rummage anyway and produce a wrapped potato that had been saving its heat under the straw, now more memory than warmth. It becomes Jab's bonus. He noses it pleased and bats it neatly to cool before swallowing. Performance review exceeds expectations in community relations. A memory surfaces uninvited, a village dog you once met that would curl to sleep on the stove bench by the icons soaking heat until morning rounds. The old woman of that house swore the dog's dreams predicted weather twitching, meant wind snoring meant snow. You didn't believe it then. Tonight you'd take prophecy from a teacup. Rhiab sneezes twice, and your spine reads it as news. A modern aside pads in wagging somewhere, an office whiteboard lists perimeter monitoring solutions, and a consultant has drawn a bullet list with arrows. Here the bullet list eats leftovers, wears its own fur, and requires no onboarding slides. Performance bonuses are measured in bones, which is a far fairer currency than stock. The seated watcher shifts, and you hear it the faintest crunch out beyond the ring of light. Then another. Then a soft, almost conversational yip that sounds like a question addressed to the dark. Rhiab freezes, one forepaw lifted tail stiff as a mast. The men go still in a choreography older than folklore. The horse turns its head, listening with eyes. The fire snaps a loud pine blister, and your heart declines the distraction. The older man rises and takes the iron-tipped staff from beside the log. Not brave, he says without looking at you. Organised. He means the wolves, but the word also describes the people here, each person, a task, each task a knot in a net. He nods once at Semyon bells. The harness answers a brighter, steadier chime. You feel suddenly that bells are less sound than geometry circles drawn in air around the sleigh, a compass that says keep out. Another odd stubborn tidbit lands. Some families believe that feeding their dogs a bit of black bread with charcoal on certain holy days kept them clear-headed. And loyal, part folk medicine, part superstition, part quietly practical detox after too many kitchen scraps. Whether or not it worked biochemically, it ritualized care, reminding people that tools with hearts deserve maintenance. The yip repeats, then turns into the deeper, throatier bark of a wolf calling a vote. Rhiab answers with two sharp barks and a growl that starts somewhere behind his ribs and ends somewhere under your sternum. The fire seems to lean with him. For a long moment nothing happens. Then, as if the night were merely holding its breath, the sound shifts to the right. Farther off pads crunching on a different line, a flank probing along the tree line past the fire's edge, measuring the curve of human courage. The men resume breathing. The watcher settles, but he doesn't sit. Rhiab lowers his paw and keeps the growl for afters. You unclench your jaw and discover you've made an ice mould of your molars with your lips. The horse stamps, shakes a halo of bell sound into the cold, and looks personally vindicated. Not yet, Semyon murmurs. They're hungry, but they count. He nods toward the boundary post you passed. There's a church 2 versts on. If bells carry wolves, listen. He means the great bell, the one that marks knights and saints and sometimes fires. You try to imagine its voice rolling through this cold, turning snowflakes into awakened ears. A small laugh slips out of you, almost accidental. We're holding a staff meeting, you say. Agenda do not be eaten. The younger man grins again. Even the older one allows his moustache a millimetre of amusement. Rhiab does not smile. Dogs have the mercy of seriousness when it counts. The wind changes, and with it the smoke strategy. It billows low, curling around your knees, and somewhere in that grey curtain, you think you hear a sound different from paws, lighter, faster, a patter that runs across the top of the world like fingers on a drumhead. Snow starting fine as flour, tapping its doubt onto the night. The laker's ears swivel toward the road ahead, not the forest. Rhiab isn't looking at wolves anymore. He's listening to something else, something rhythmic and modest that rides the wind the way smells do. The younger man follows the dog's gaze. Hear that he asks, voice low. You do now a dim, far jangle. Not your bells, not here, but a second set, fainter a troika somewhere down the road or on the river, travelling toward you or past you or into your story like a new paragraph. But the next duty was even stranger. At first you think the second jingle is just the fire talking to itself. Resin popping, sparks giving opinions, but then the sound steadies into a cadence faint and correct, the way practised hands write cursive on air. Rhiab cocks his head tail half raised. The men all tilt as though the noise were a rope they might catch. The younger one smiles without showing teeth. Troika, he says, and you hear it too now. Not your sleigh's modest cluster of bells, but the proud, single, poduzny bell of a fast harness, a small bronze throat with a long memory. Snow begins to sift fine flour at first, then a more deliberate sprinkle that outlines every pine twig in sugar. Sound travels oddly under snow-laden sky. It comes close, then slips away, then returns from a surprising angle as if testing your patience. The fire lowers its shoulders, settling into a glow fit for an audience, and you feel the horse's ear-pointed attention sharpen. Somewhere out there, the troika's runners are writing their song on the river or on a winter road polished by 100 errands. You imagine 3 horses abreast mains, salted steam making halos that would impress any icon painter not currently indoors. The bells arrive before the men do, and for a strangely long moment the night is all acoustics, the bright metallic thread of the Poduzny bell, the hum of wind moving through spruce like a deep choir, the nearer, softer jingle on your own harness chiming in reply. Then lantern light appears, 1, then 2, swinging, showing and hiding trunks in quick anatomy lessons. The troika slides into view, elegant as a signature centre horse under an arching shaft side, horse's eager driver standing braced in a padded coat that could be a wall. He slows without drama, and the bell gives a last declarative stroke as if to say present. Smell becomes today's motif again, not just smoke and horse, but cold iron hot rope, the faint vinegar of leather dressing and that powdery scent of fresh fallen snow that makes even your mittens feel clean. The driver pushes back his hood and grins at the bonfire like an old friend. He has a face the wind has already met several times. Evening, he says, or whatever we call this part of winter. Reab does a low wag securities version of a handshake. The horses snort and twitch their ears toward the trees where interest sometimes grows teeth. Mainstream historical fact, since your head likes anchors in Russia. Church and harness bells were more than decoration. They were language. Russian Orthodox ringing as a whole grammar Blagovest, the measured tolling of a single large bell to begin a service. Trezvon, a joyful peal of multiple bells in rhythmic patterns. Peribor, the sorrowful descending toll often used for funerals. Importantly, the bells are not swung. As in Western practice, the clappers move, the bells remain still, and a skilled zvonar ringer plays ropes with hands and feet like an organist without keys. In winter, those patterns stitched villages together across white distances, time made audible, comfort made bronze. Quirky tidbit to warm your pockets, the famous Tsar bell in Moscow, cast in the 18th century, and so enormous it could host a tea party inside, has never rung a day in its life. A chunk broke off during a fire while it was still in the casting pit. So the biggest Russian bell is a permanent silent guest history's most impressive paperweight. People still pose beside it as if hoping sheer proximity will jingle their luck. Scholars still argue about bells and wolves. Did harness bells genuinely deter predators? Or did they merely comfort travellers while alerting highwaymen with excellent ears? Folklore insists wolves dislike bright, regular noise. Some naturalists counter that habituation is quick when hunger is patient. Parish reports occasionally blame careless jingling for drawing curious animals toward villages during famine. The debate lives in footnotes, and in nights like this, where your nervous system votes firmly for sound as shield even if science clears its throat. The driver who introduces himself as Pavel jerks his chin toward the fire. We heard the blaze averted back, he says. Sound carried flat. Big sky, low clouds. Semyon nods. His beard crackles with frost when he moves. Wolves, Pavel asks. You and Semyon exchange the short version. Pavel doesn't flinch. Then we'll pour tea, he says matter-of-factly, and in the strange generosity of winter, a tiny stove appears sprung from some compartment of the troika, like a conjurer's trick. He props it in the fire's lee and sets a battered samovar atop it, the sort whose dented belly has poured more hope than metal should. His assistant lantern man number 2 shakes a pouch, lets a thin glitter of tea leaves fall like a brief miracle. In minutes the samovar begins to mutter, which is how you know the evening plans to keep you all alive. While water considers boiling, Pavel tells you about bells in towns. They regulate, he says, tamping down the stove's little coal bed. Curfew, fire, flood, victory, plague. He shrugs. Whatever needs to say itself loudly. You think of muffled bells in snowfall heard not as notes but as domes of sound moving through white, soft-edged and patient. Somewhere 2 versts away, a church might be tolling Blagovest for Vespers, the slow voice of a single bell that says not yet but soon. The phrase slides over the forest and under your skin. An odd philosophical aside, warmed by the stove and your own breath bells are clocks you can hear with your eyes closed. In winter, when sight is tricky and distance lies sound, keeps better promises. You decide you'd like a schedule populated entirely by noises, whistles for bread chimes for warmth, Rajab's growl for common sense. The tea blooms into steam that smells like a conversation you can sip. Pavel pours into dented tin mugs without asking who wants any. Winter etiquette assumes yes. He adds a sugar lump to yours with the solemnity of a small ritual, and a little slice of lemon his assistant produced with a flourish that suggests he should be performing on a more forgiving stage. The first mouthful stings, and then forgives, and somehow the forest looks less interested in your autobiography. Bells again. Pavel points at the poduzhny bell slung at the troika's arch. Voronej, he says. You can tell by the tone. He rings it with a finger. Even at rest, it has a voice clear with a tiny wobble like a smile. Old drivers prided themselves on bell dialects. A trained ear could sometimes guess a region by timbre. Whether that's truth or trade boast is another one of those debates that keep historians cheerful in January. You warmed from the inside decide to believe it. The idea that roads have accents pleases you. Another fact pads in wearing wool socks in heavy snowfall ringers, sometimes stuffed cloth between clappers and bell mouths, to dampen sound during penitential seasons or practical emergencies. Too much ringing could confuse signal for noise. There are accounts of churches rationing peals during sieges or epidemics, reserving the full tresvon for endings and miracles. Snow muffled what fabric did not, wrapping villages in a hush that demanded listening. Pavel's assistant, a man built like a fence post and named, he says, Leonid, points toward the dark. Hear it, he asks, and you do a different bell now, bigger, slower, rolling across the treetops like a thoughtful bear. Not your road bell, not Pavel's little singer. Church. One long tone at regular intervals, a low heartbeat laid under the forest's pulse. Blagovest. Even the horses stop chewing their bits to hear. Ryab's tail gives 2 deliberate ticks. You picture a ringer in a frost-painted belfry-gloved hands coaxing the clapper with a rope breath, fogging the wooden slats, ears half-frozen, soul wide awake. He's telling everyone, hunters, widows, wolves, that time continues to happen, and you may trust it for the next hour. A modern aside comes clinking down like a stray spoon. In cities we set phone alarms called Zen and Waves, and then we ignore them. Out here, a single bronze voice can tilt a village towards soup or prayer or quiet. Efficiency consultants would love this system if they could expense mittens. Snow thickens and the sound softens accordingly, like the bell is being slowly wrapped. The bonfire obliges by standing up straighter, its orange spine pushing back. The men settle into a rhythm that feels older than whatever they call your century tea. Past rains, checked fire-fed eyes sweeping the tree line in arcs that eventually overlap into a net. For a few minutes the wolves consider invisibility the better part of dinner. Quirky tidbit echoing down the road from your tea, some troika crews tuned their poduzhny bells to personal preference drilling, or filing microscopic adjustments, to get the exact cheerful scold they wanted. There are even stories half true, half brag of drivers recognizing friends by bell strike alone on foggy nights. You imagine a winter party, where no one removes their boots and everyone shouts, "You made it," at the sound of a certain tinkle. The debate-minded part of your brain, stubborn even in mittens, reminds you that to some communities the bell's voice could also be control summons to labour alarm for conscription, tidy punctuation on edicts that did not ask politely. Sound is never neutral when it organises bodies. Historians disagree on whether bell authority softened or sharpened communal life. Listening to Blagovest roll over the pines, you suspect both can be true comfort and command, cradle and leash. Pavel finishes his tea, knocks the last drop toward the fire and sets the tin at his boot. He cocks his head for a long professional moment, reading the night as if it were a timetable. Then he nods at Semyon. "We move together," he says. "Lantern left, bell right. Church ahead." He looks at you. Between bells and firewolves become accountants. Let them calculate. You climb back onto your sleigh, feeling the worn plank under your palms like the hand of an old friend. Ryab trots once around both vehicles, satisfied with the perimeter he has drawn, then stations himself where light meets maybe. The church bell continues, patient as a teacher. Snow sifts, the road accepts. The men prepare to write another careful line across the white ledger. You think briefly and treacherously that this might even become comfortable sound, stitched to sound human to human, a convoy with a logic that the night itself will respect. But the next duty was even stranger. Snow keeps falling in a steady fine curtain, muffling even the most confident sounds. The church bell still beats at its patient interval, but now each stroke is wrapped in cotton, blurred like a memory. Pavel's troika and Semyon's sleigh stand side by side, both horses stamping to keep blood-moving tails flicking frost into the air. The bonfire gutters, then brightens flames bending under gusts. For a moment the scene feels almost staged, men, beasts, bells, and fire, all participants in a theatre where the audience is hunger with 4 legs. You lean back into the sleigh scarf, pulled close, feeling the straw scratch your boots through. The felt, the itch of your shuba against your chin, the heavy pressure of the night pressing on every seam of your clothes. Smell has given way to hearing again, wind-combing branches, snow hissing faintly as it layers horses, nickering men murmuring. And behind it all a hush that is not silence but expectation, as though the forest is counting. Mainstream historical fact for this act, Tsarist Russia did not let even wolves interrupt bureaucracy. Taxes had to be paid, roads, maintained grain collected no matter the season. Peasants trudged or sleighs through snow to bring dues to parish offices, sometimes escorted by armed watchmen, sometimes alone, always vulnerable to whatever waited in the woods. In some provinces, official decrees even acknowledged wolf hazards, but only to insist that duties still be met. Bureaucracy did not take snow days, and wolves were no excuse. Now the quirky tidbit in a few 18th century records, you can find peasants fined for lost dues, with notes blaming forest wolves for devoured grain sacks or destroyed sleighs. Some clerks, it seems, accepted this explanation. Others scrawled in the margin sharp comments about folk tales and excuses. Imagine trying to explain to a humorless official that your taxes are currently digesting inside a grey stomach somewhere between two birch trees. It was bureaucracy versus biology, and bureaucracy preferred paperwork. Scholars argue about the extent to which wolf danger truly influenced state policy. Did Tsarist administrators overstate the peril in order to justify new levies for hunts, or were the hunts themselves ineffective spectacles that did more for propaganda than safety? Environmental historians suggest wolf populations were more stable than sensationalist reports claimed, and that famine years created exceptional spikes in conflict, rather than a constant siege. Yet parish archives, travellers' diaries and folk songs all sing the same refrain: winter roads were places of both obligation and fear. The debate endures like a bell that never quite stops ringing. As Pavel and Semyon debate the best route toward the Church River Road or forest track, you catch another sound. Not the podusny bell, not Blagovest, not the dog's growl. A faint creaking, rhythmic, like wood under strain. It could be another sleigh, or it could be the forest itself bending under weight. Leonid tilts his head, eyes narrowing, and even Ryab's ears can't decide where to point. For a second, the world holds its breath. A modern aside sneaks in to calm your nerves. This feels like standing in a long line at the DMV while the lights flicker, and someone whispers that wolves might be in the parking lot. You still have to fill out your forms. You still have to wait. Bureaucracy even here is scarier than teeth. The creaking grows louder. Lantern light ahead sways between trees. Another sleigh smaller piled with sacks covered by cloth. Its driver hunches low, urging his horse forward in jerky bursts. As he draws near the bonfire, his face shows what his bells already told you: panic. He's been followed, and he's not sure if he left the pursuit behind. His horse's lathered steam rising from its shoulders like incense in a cold cathedral. The men around the fire rise in practiced unison. The younger one throws more branches onto the blaze sparks, leaping like startled birds. Leonid grabs his musket, checks the pan. Semyon loosens his grip on the reins. The dog stiffens, tail straight, a growl vibrating like a string plucked too hard. The forest beyond the fire flickers, shifting between black and orange, hiding whatever may or may not be calculating. And for you, huddled in straw, wrapped in fur heart, drumming louder than bells, it feels less like history, and more like a ledger in which your name is still being penciled. The newcomers mutter of shadows along the riverbank, of shapes, keeping pace, of hunger that did not listen to bureaucracy. The bonfire flares, the bells strike, the snow thickens, the forest waits. But the next duty was even stranger. The new sleigh creaks into the circle of firelight, its horse trembling with exhaustion, foam frozen into stiff lace along the bridle. The driver slumps forward, face ghostly in the flickering glowbeard, iced into a brittle sculpture. His eyes dart to each of you as though counting, reassuring himself that he has found a congregation and not an ambush. His sleigh is piled high with burlap sacks that bulge, oddly, not grain you realize, but bundles of firewood bound with twine. Fuel is currency in these months worth more than coins or polite words. The younger man from the bonfire steps forward and catches the horse's bridle, murmuring in a low rhythmic tone. The horse exhales with a great shudder, then lowers its head, steam curling upward. Pavel gestures and the driver dismounts clumsily, his boots clapping against packed snow. "They chased," he whispers hoarsely, a voice frayed. 2 versts, maybe 3. I thought he breaks off his hand, sketching the outline of teeth in the air. The fire crackles in sympathy, shooting sparks upward, each one a miniature escape. You shift in the straw of your sleigh, pulling your scarf higher, watching as the man's words spill into the circle. The others listen without interruption, eyes flicking to the tree line where every shadow is a suspect. The dog Rajab prowls the perimeter, hackles raised, nose-carving sentences from the air. Mainstream historical fact to hold on to wolves in Russian folklore were never just animals. They occupied a liminal space between predator and omen. Folktales told of the Volkodlak, the wolfman, not quite werewolf, as in Western lore, but a figure cursed into lupine form. Children were warned of wolves not only as teeth in the night, but as symbols of hunger, exile, and fate itself. Villagers told stories of men spared by wolves who later found fortune, or of wolves that appeared at crossroads to test human choices. These weren't bedtime tales to soothe, they were warnings that blurred fact and meaning. Quirky tidbit tucked into those same stories, some peasants believed that tossing bread crusts over your left shoulder on a journey kept wolves at bay. Others carried amulets of wolf bone or claw, claiming it granted the bearer a portion of the animal's courage. One particularly odd charm involved sewing a bit of wolf fur into a child's cap to make him walk unnoticed among wolves. Imagine explaining to your grandmother why you're stitching predator hair into the baby's hat practicality, wrapped in superstition, survival, stitched to folklore. Scholars debate endlessly whether these tales were rooted in real encounters or were narrative tools to teach caution. Folklorists argue that the wolf's role as trickster and tester reflects deep anxieties about famine and exile. Environmental historians counter that the actual wolf population, while significant, could hardly have been so omnipresent as the tales suggest. Yet when you sit by a Russian bonfire at midnight, smoke thick snow whispering and hear distant howls threading through the pines, you understand why people preferred stories that explained their fears, even if the explanations had teeth. The new driver continues his report. He says the wolves came silently at first shadows threading the road, then revealed themselves with a chorus of howls that jolted his horse into a panicked gallop. He dared not drop the firewood. It was his dues, his tax, his offering. To lose it meant not only hunger at home but punishment from authorities. So he lashed the horse bells, clanging wildly, praying that noise would buy him distance. "I thought the road would never end," he mutters, voice cracking. His eyes shine with exhaustion more than tears, but he looks younger now, stripped of defences, a man who has run out of strategies. Pavel and Semyon exchange glances that say not the first time, not the last. Leonid stirs the fire, feeding it another log, and sparks rise like frightened birds. The men mutter about whether to move together toward the church to wait for dawn, or to scatter in different directions to confuse pursuit. Each option has a cost. Bells carry yes, but so does silence. You sit very still, mittened hands gripping your knees. Your thoughts flicker between the smell of smoke, the feel of straw under your boots, the distant thud of the church bell softened by snow. The night feels like parchment written on by too many authors. Each fire, each sleigh, each wolf leaving marks the story tangled the ink still wet. A modern aside drifts into your mind. It's like sitting in a dimly lit bus station at 2 a.m, with strangers each telling their own version of why the last bus was late. Everyone believes their story is the truest, and everyone is equally tired. The difference is that here the bus has teeth and does not stop for passengers. The horse of the new sleigh lifts its head, suddenly nostrils flaring, ears stiff. Rajab freezes tail, stiff as iron. You follow their gaze toward the dark where the firelight fades into formlessness. For a moment there is nothing, just snow falling and branches shifting under their burden. Then faint but deliberate howl arcs across the night. Not close, not far, exactly in that place where imagination fills the gaps. Another joins, then another, weaving a braid of sound around the fire. The men tense hands on staffs and muskets. The driver who fled the pursuit buries his face in his mittens, whispering prayers half swallowed by wool. The fire pops loudly, sending sparks into the air as though trying to answer the howls. Your heart drums louder than bells, louder than fire, louder than sense. And then silence again, a silence that feels less like absence and more like calculation. The church bell continues in the distance, oblivious its rhythm, steady its voice, unconcerned. It marks time while you and the others sit in the margin between story and survival. The men look at one another silently, voting with their eyes. Stay, go, split, unite. Every option has teeth. The bonfire cannot decide for you. And you, huddled in your sleigh, realize the story has shifted. You're no longer just a traveller. You're part of the tale, one more figure around the blaze, waiting for wolves who may or may not be real, but who always arrive when the night grows long. But the next duty was even stranger. The silence after the howls is worse than the howls themselves. It hangs over the bonfire like a heavy blanket, muffling even the snap of resin in the logs. The men breathe quietly, each breath a small puff of cloud drifting upward and vanishing. Horses stand with heads high, ears pivoting, listening in ways human ears cannot. Rajab the dog patrols a narrow arc tail, rigid, each paw set down carefully, as though he doesn't want to alert the snow itself. The fire throws up a new gust of sparks that drift skyward before dissolving like the brief hope of summer. You try to settle yourself deeper into the sleigh, but comfort is a word winter does not allow. The straw is prickly, your boots are stiff, your mittens damp at the edges from snow. Still, you pull your scarf higher until only your eyes peek out, peering across the fire toward the faces of the others. Each is outlined in orange and shadow, the glow making them look less like men and more like icons painted on moving wood. Mainstream historical fact to anchor this moment. Travellers on long winter routes often carried sleigh bells not only for cheer or wolf deterrence, but to warn others of their approach on narrow roads. In crowded Moscow streets, regulations even required bells on certain vehicles to prevent collisions, but in the provinces bells took on a more superstitious role. Peasants tied clusters of small bells to sleighs, believing the jingling frightened away evil spirits as well as wolves. Noise was both practical and mystical, the auditory equivalent of a cross held up against the dark. Quirky tidbits and merchants went so far as to tune their bells to musical intervals, boasting that their troikas sang as they flew across frozen rivers. Stories tell of drivers who could recognize an approaching sleigh by its unique bell pattern, much like people today know a friend's ringtone. Imagine hearing a faint jingle in the distance and thinking, that must be Ivan Petrovich on his way from Tver, always sharp and flat in the same breath. It's history's version of a personalized notification, but scholars disagree as always about whether bells truly deterred wolves or instead drew their attention. Reports from famine winters describe wolves chasing sleighs regardless of how many jingles accompanied them. Some naturalists argue wolves learned quickly that bells meant horses and horses meant food. Others insist the opposite, claiming wolves avoided strange noises and only attacked when hunger overcame fear. The debate remains unresolved, leaving you to wonder whether the bells around your horse's neck are comfort or advertisement. Pavel Evercalm suggests a plan. We move in a line, he says. Troika first sleighs behind, bells front and back. Fire stays here, maybe wolves prefer it. He gestures toward the new driver with the firewood bundles. Your load comes with us. Wood for the church maybe, or for whoever needs it most. The driver nods, still shaken but grateful to be folded into a group rather than left as a single sentence on the road. Semyon strokes his beard, ice crystals dropping like glass dust. The church bell will guide us, he agrees, but the wolves. He doesn't finish the sentence. No one needs him to. The dog growls, softly punctuation enough. The fire pops again, louder this time, sending a flare of sparks into the low snow clouds above. For an instant, the whole clearing glows like a cathedral dome. You catch yourself thinking the wolves must see it too, eyes reflecting fire, calculating whether hunger outweighs risk. A modern aside slips into your tired mind. It's like driving at night on a lonely highway, headlights carving a tunnel of vision, while everything beyond remains a mystery. You tell yourself, nothing is out there, but your body knows better. It's not the headlights that matter, it's what lies just beyond their reach. The men begin preparations. Leonid douses the smaller stove, tucking the samovar carefully into the troika's cargo. The younger man stamps snow over the fire's edges, leaving only the central blaze. Let it burn down, Pavel says. Maybe it keeps their attention a while. Horses are positioned, harnesses, adjusted bells shaken to test their voices. The jingling is strangely reassuring, even though you know it might be nothing more than tradition dressing itself up as protection. Another fact, Russian peasants often relied on frozen rivers as winter highways, the ice offering faster routes than muddy summer roads. But frozen rivers also brought risk. Cracks could appear without warning, especially where currents ran strong. Travellers listened for the groan of ice under runners, a sound that told them when to speed up or steer closer to the bank. Entire sleighs, horses and all were sometimes swallowed. Yet the practice endured because winter roads demanded compromise with nature. As the convoy forms, you feel a pulse of anticipation, dread, and even strange excitement. There is something powerful about moving together, bells ringing in unison to lanterns swinging. It feels almost ceremonial, as if you are part of a procession rather than a group of frightened travellers. The church bell tolls again in the distance, marking time, guiding indifferent. The sleighs begin to move, runners squealing softly on packed snow horses, breathing in plumes. Your sleigh takes its place in the line, the straw crunching under you as you shift. Rajab trots alongside, watchful ears swivelling to every sound. Snow continues to fall thick enough now to blur the tree line, reducing the world to a moving corridor of bells, lanterns and hoofbeats. Behind you, the bonfire crackles faintly, then fades as distance grows. The forest closes in black shapes against white ground, infinite possibilities for teeth. You huddle into your furs, listening to the bells, trying to decide whether they sound brave or desperate, and then a sound not from your convoy. A new chime, faint irregular off to the left where the forest thickens. Not bells, not exactly. Something clinking. Metal against metal. Too uneven for a sleigh. Too deliberate to be chance. The men stiffen, horses falter, the dog freezes, even the snow seems to hush. The road stretches ahead, marked by the steady church bell. But to the left in the trees something else jingles, as if mocking the rhythm you've trusted. And you realise with a sudden chill not every bell belongs to you. But the next duty was even stranger. The convoy halts as if commanded by the snow itself. Hooves stop mid-step, bells fall into uneasy silence, and even the horses' breath clouds hesitate before dissolving. That irregular clinking in the woods, metal against metal, faint yet sharp threads through the air like a voice trying to imitate your bells and getting the accent wrong. It is not wind, not branch, not wolf. It is deliberate. You lean forward, straw rustling under your boots, straining to see through the falling curtain of snow. Lantern light stretches only a few yards into the trees before the flakes swallow it. Beyond that line, blackness presses, filled with shapes that might be trunks or shadows or things that move when watched. Rajab's growl rumbles in the base of his throat, low and steady, a warning that doubles as reassurance. Yes, you heard it too. You're not inventing fear. Pavel raises his hand, the universal sign for silence. Leonid shifts his musket eyes, narrowing. Semyon's grip on the reins tightens, bells shivering faintly in protest. The new driver, clutching his sleigh of firewood, swallows hard enough for you to hear it. The church bell far off continues its calm intervals, utterly indifferent, like a clerk stamping papers while a building burns. Mainstream historical fact to pin this moment. Russia's winter roads were not only stalked by wolves, they were also plagued by human predators. Highwaymen and brigands, new travellers carried goods taxes or simply furs worth stealing. In the 17th and 18th centuries, reports describe armed bands attacking sleighs on lonely routes, often disguising themselves as travellers in distress. Wolves took sheep, but men took everything. Authorities tried to regulate travel, demanding written passes or convoys, but the vastness of Russia laughed at paperwork. On nights like this, the danger behind the trees could just as easily have 2 legs as 4. Now, the quirky tidbit, some bandits actually used bells as bait. They would tie broken harness bells to branches, or stir them with sticks, mimicking the sound of a troika in motion. Curious or lonely travellers, hearing the familiar chime, would steer toward it only to find themselves face to face with men who had better use for their sleigh. Imagine the horror of chasing after what you thought was company, only to discover it was an invitation written in trickery. Tonight, that clinking off to the left suddenly feels less mysterious and more calculated. Scholars argue whether wolf legends sometimes masked human crime. Parish records noting lost to wolves may have been safer to write than murdered by neighbours. A body mauled in the snow could erase uncomfortable questions. Folklorists note that tales of wolf pursuit sometimes echo suspiciously human tactics, ambush, decoy, flank. The debate remains unsettled: how many of Russia's winter ghosts were furred and how many wore mittens? The forest creaks again. A gust shifts branches, and in the flicker of the lantern you think you glimpse a shadow pulling back, withdrawing deeper. The irregular clinking follows once, twice, then stops altogether. Silence presses in, louder than noise. The convoy exhales as one. Pavel mutters, "Not wolves. Worse." Leonid spits into the snow, which hisses faintly on contact. Semyon shakes his head. Forest bandits don't fight wolves, but they'll steal a bell if it jingles. He gives a small laugh with no joy. At least wolves leave you clothes. A modern aside crawls into your head. It's like choosing between getting your laptop stolen or your house haunted. One empties your wallet, the other empties your nerves. Neither leaves you eager for morning. The decision comes quickly. Keep moving, Pavel says. No stopping in the dark. He signals and the troika surges forward. Bells chiming again, this time loud and confident. Semyon urges his horse on sleigh creaking. The firewood driver falls into line, his animal stumbling but obeying. The bells form a wall of sound, a chorus daring the dark to answer, and yet you cannot shake the feeling that the imitation bells you heard are not finished with you. Somewhere someone or something now knows you're here travelling as a convoy, your numbers counted, your cargo noted. Wolves calculate hunger, men calculate profit. Both do the math in silence. Fact to steady your mind in response to such dangers. Wealthy merchants sometimes hired armed escorts, sleighs of Cossacks riding shotgun, their muskets glinting in lantern light. But ordinary peasants could not afford such luxuries. They relied on numbers, on bells, on fire, and sometimes on luck. History is full of grand strategies, but on winter roads survival was arithmetic. Quirky tidbit number 2. There are accounts of travellers disguising themselves as monks or priests to deter bandits, draping black cloaks and ringing handbells as though carrying sacraments. Did it work occasionally? More often the disguise failed under scrutiny, and the robbers laughed before demanding donations of everything useful. Tonight you wonder whether the real monastery bell in the distance is your only ally. The convoy moves steadily, bells clanging, lanterns swaying. Snow falls thicker, cloaking the world in white noise. Every so often you glance left into the trees, waiting for the fake bells to resume. They never do. Perhaps that makes it worse. Ahead, the church bell tolls again, nearer now. The sound rolls through the snow, muffled but clear, a voice of stone and bronze that doesn't care about wolves or bandits. It says only, here is time, here is place, keep moving. The men relax a little, but the silence from the left lingers in your bones like a bruise. You know you've left something behind in those woods, an unfinished sentence, a story that may catch up with you later. The dog growls once more, then falls quiet, ears twitching but tail steady. The horses pick up pace, eager now, hooves drumming a rhythm that seems to agree with the bell ahead. You feel warmth creep back into your chest, not from confidence but from momentum. Moving is better than waiting, and yet you can't help thinking wolves howl to warn you. Men don't. The road stretches forward, white and endless, the bell ahead louder with each step. You cling to its voice like a lifeline, praying it will carry you through. But in the back of your mind you still hear the ghostly echo of those false bells, jingling irregularly in the forest, mocking your trust. And you wonder when the wolves finally come, will you even notice them over the sound of men pretending? But the next duty was even stranger. Sight becomes the night's compass. Snow thickens into a slow, deliberate veil, and everything you trust must be seen twice, once by lantern, once by instinct. The convoy stretches into a shimmering procession. Pavel's troika first, its poduzhny bell marking the beat. Semyon's sleigh behind. The firewood driver, last cargo, humped like sleeping hills. Lantern halos float ahead of each runner groove, carving a golden tunnel through a world made of white noise. Rajab patrols the seam between light and maybe his coat salted with snowflakes that refuse to melt. Then the forest edits itself. At the margin of your lantern's reach, 2 small green coins wink and go out. Another pair appears higher, then lower, then gone. Eyeshine skims the edge of sight like skipping stones. The horses feel it before you do. Their heads lift in the same second, ears pivot, breath changes from work to warning. The bells sound brighter, as if trying to be both melody and fence. The first howl does not arrive as a scream. It slips in as a thread thin, almost conversational, then braids with a second voice and a third, until the whole sound becomes architecture, something you could walk inside. It's not behind you anymore. It's beside you and ahead and in the riverbed of your spine. The wolves are no longer a rumour. There are grammar lessons spelled with pause. Pavel does not look back. He lifts his weight, speaks to the troika with the calm of a judge who has tried this case before. The centre horse gathers itself. The side horses match. Runners hiss. The bell clears its throat and becomes authority. Semyon sets your sleigh into the groove the troika makes. The firewood driver clings to both reins and prayer. Snow stings your cheeks like salt. You bow your head against it and watch the shadows on the left reorganize into intent. Mainstream historical fact, to keep your nerves from inventing their own 19th century travellers, left dozens of accounts of wolves pacing sleighs at night, especially during famine winters when carrion ran thin. Provincial authorities documented wolf depredations and paid bounties. Memoirs describe packs following at a measured distance, testing speeds, sliding closer at curves or wooded stretches. Not every road sang this chorus, but the song was real enough that people tuned their lives to it. Quirky tidbit, pocket-sized and strange, some drivers dragged a line of brush or a bundled sapling behind the sleigh. claiming the swishing tail kicked snow into pursuing muzzles and ruined the wolves' wind. Others tied a ring of small scrap metal charms to their drag so the rear of the sleigh chimed like a sarcastic bell, half warning, half insult. There are also tales of travellers keeping a tar-soaked rag ready to light and fling an improvised comet, meant to confuse a leader long enough to buy 10 heartbeats. It wasn't science so much as audacity you could set on fire. Scholars still argue how often these chases ended in violence versus theatre. Were wolves chiefly testing routes curious and cautious, or were they truly intent on horse and driver? Some historians suggest that travel writers dramatised episodes to sell copies in warm salons. Others countersign the parish registers that tally horses lost and bodies found. One complicating note rabies outbreaks sometimes turned skittish wolves into daylight boldness rare but unforgettable. The footnotes keep debating while tonight elects to present you with a live demonstration you did not request. The pack's strategy becomes a diagram. 2 wolves shadow the left tree line, a third cruises the ditch on the right, one holds parallel in the road's old ruts, and somewhere judging by Rhiab's attention and the horse's side-eye, another slips ahead, invisible sketching your future. They are not racing, they are counting. Your bell is one number, your speed another, the falling snow a variable they like. Pavel flicks his whip not to strike, but to draw a line in the air the horses understand longer stride, close ranks cut the curve. The troika becomes a machine you can trust. Semyon hums under his breath an old stove-bench lullaby maybe, and your sleigh finds the pocket behind Pavel's runners where the wind is less cruel. The firewood driver clatters through the same geometry. 2 heartbeats later, wood squeaking rains a confession in his fists. You hear paws now light precise, then softer when they shift to drifted patches. The sound is almost dainty, which feels unfair. Predators should sound like storms. Instead, they sound like competent clerks taking notes. Your body offers a modern aside to keep panic from eating the furniture. This is the worst cardio class ever, and the instructor keeps shouting increased pace in wolf. At least there's no membership fee besides your pulse. 2 jokes in and you feel marginally human again. The church bell rolls across the snow closer now, a low iron moon rising and falling. Pavel tilts toward its voice, choosing the river road where ice runs broad and visibility improves. The sleighs slide down onto the frozen surface and the world widens. Here lantern light can stretch farther, here eyeshine has fewer places to hide. The wolves do not vanish. They adapt, fanning wider over the flats, a grey constellation that insists on being read. Semyon speaks without turning. If they rush, they'll rush at the bend, he says, where the bank shelters the wind and runners squeal. He glances at you, a frost-silvered smile. Keep your courage in your boots. That's where it's warm. You wriggle your toes inside your Valenki and decide he might be right. Fat glides alongside like a skater. Troikas could outrun wolves on hard, clean ice, especially with fresh horses. And a driver who understood the river's grammar, where currents thinned the freeze, where snow hid seams, where the far bank made a false invitation. But speed was not a permanent solution. Endurance belonged to the pack if the road granted them shadow and time. Travellers survived by stacking many small advantages: bells, fire numbers, dogs, and a refusal to make bad decisions twice. The lead wolf appears in full for the first time, rangy-ribbed not with starvation, but with efficiency, coat a ledger of greys. He paces the troika at 20 yards, head low, ears laid back, tongue hidden. He's a question asked in perfect cursive. You want to admire him from a warm bench in a well-lit museum. Life has opted for a different exhibit. Rhiab's growl lifts into barks, 2, then 3, each one launched toward the leader like punctuation marks with teeth. The wolf flicks a glance at the dog and revises his math. Another shadow slides in from the right. Leonid raises his musket, then lowers it with a small curse, snow in the pan powder, damper weapon reduced to sculpture. Pavel does not waste breath on anger. He drops a hand to the side of the troika and brings up a tar rag he'd been warming near the samovar, earlier insurance-wearing soot. One spark from the tinder steel, a cough of flame, and the rag becomes a small star in his fist. He swings it wide. The fire scribbles an orange line across the grey arithmetic. The pack flows around the light like water around a rock. No heroics, just adjustment, but your breath returns in parcels. Another quirky tactic parades past your brain. Some drivers swore by tossing a single fur cap high into the air behind them. The movement snagged attention like a startled bird. Wolves checked. Horses stole distance. Was it foolish? Yes. Did it sometimes work? Also yes. History is full of absurdities that saved lives. Tonight Pavel keeps his hat, but your respect for ridiculous solutions grows 3 sizes. The river curves left. Wind dies in the lee. The ice sings a low warning note. Runners whisper, bells tattle. The wolves tighten. You feel time dilate into a slow drip. Pavel urges the team. Semyon kisses the air to steady yours. The firewood driver whispers to saints he has not spoken to since harvest. The church bell answers with a steady pulse that says only continue. Here comes the scholarly debate stepping neatly into your breath. Were all these chase scenes as common as lore insists, or did a few spectacular nights cast long shadows over generations? Some argue that memory like snow drifts covering ordinary tracks with dramatic ones. Others reply that underreporting of near misses skews the record. People write about tragedy and miracle, not about all the nights that ended in soup. Your convoy is currently auditioning for the footnotes. You would prefer to be tallied under soup. The lead wolf edges closer, misreading your preference. 10 yards now. You see the pink seam of his mouth not open, not snarling, just measuring. Ryab stretches himself longer a line of intention and barks again, this time with insult. The wolf flinches half an ear twitch, really, and that's when Pavel's cometed rag arcs a second time lower nearer. It hisses on the ice and spins in a bright little tantrum. The wolf check slides a paw's breadth, no drama but enough, and the pack's cadence stutters. The troika steals 3 lengths, your sleigh borrows 2, the firewood bundles sigh. A small victory the size of a spark. Snow thickens, then thins the sky negotiating terms. The church bell grows measurable. You can count the gap between strokes and fit your hopes inside it. Trees on the far bank begin to sort into individuals instead of a crowd. You imagine a belfry ahead, timbers rimed with frost, a rope swinging a ringer's hands red and certain. The picture steadies you enough to notice something new, a low fence of poles rising from the river to the road, a parish fish weir perhaps, or winter markers for safe passage forming a narrow throat the convoy must pass through. Good for guiding horses, excellent for funneling travellers, also good for anything that hunts by channeling. Pavel sees it. Semyon sees it. The wolves almost certainly know it better than both. The leader eases left to meet you at the mouth of the passage, and his constellation fans to match. The dog's bark becomes a continuous sentence. The bell says, "Here, here, here." "Eyes on me," Pavel calls, voice steady as the bell. Straight through, no swerving. If they rush, we rush more. You squeeze the sleigh rail and feel old wood under your glove smooth from other hands that chose obedience over invention. Your breath is a metronome trying to decide between allegro and survival. The weir's poles rise. Lantern light stripes them gold. The ice croons. The pack compresses into grey intent. Your convoy narrows to a thread that has to hold. You think wildly of paperwork again, some clerk's neat line that reads arrived, and decide you would like to be legible tomorrow. The bell strikes once vast and near a bronze door opening in the dark. Pavel leans, the troika leaps, and for a heartbeat the wolves vanish from the edges of sight, as if swallowed by the same note. The passage accepts the runners with a hiss. Snow flares from hooves. The world becomes a hallway with teeth politely waiting their turn. And then from the black seam beyond the poles a different light answers. The bell low steady, not fire, not lantern. Something banked and human and exactly where you most need it to be. But the next duty was even stranger. The light ahead is not fire. It glows with a steadiness that no brushwood bonfire can hold, and its colour dull amber edged with copper suggests something banked, tended, human. The convoy leans forward as one organism bells, striking a brighter rhythm as if eager to reach this sanctuary. Horses lift their knees higher, sensing destination. Even Ryab quickens, his trot nose tilted into the air, following a scent that promises smoke bread and people, rather than ice and silence. Snow thickens again, blurring edges, but the glow remains a fixed point in a night full of variables. The church bell's deep voice rolls across the whiteness, growing louder, closer, until you can almost taste bronze in the air. The wolves fade from view, though you do not trust their absence. Predators do not retreat, they reorganize. The pack's howls have ceased, replaced by a hush that feels more dangerous than pursuit, and then through the drifting snow the silhouette of a parish church appears. Wooden squat crowned with a single onion dome now capped in frost, it rises out of the white like an island. Lanterns hang from posts near its door, swaying in the wind. A stockade of rough logs surrounds the churchyard, not tall, but tall enough to make a statement. This is human ground, not wolf ground. Figures move behind the palisade, their shapes blurred by smoke curling from chimneys. The glow you saw was not a random fire, but braziers kept alive to guide travellers and discourage whatever might hunt the road. Mainstream historical fact village churches in Russia were more than places of worship. They served as communal fortresses in miniature refuges during raids, landmarks in storms, and even storage for supplies. Bells were not only for liturgy but also for alarm. Parish records note bells rung to warn of bandits, to call men to wolf hunts, or to mark fires spreading through thatched roofs. The belfry was the village's watchtower, its bronze tongue both prayer and siren. Quirky tidbit: in some rural parishes, children were tasked with tending small braziers or torches outside the church during winter nights, a tradition half sacred, half practical. These guardian flames reassured travellers who saw them flicker across snowfields. Folklore claimed that as long as the flame burned, wolves dared not cross the threshold of the parish boundary. Was it theology, or just the physics of fire? Either way, the ritual persisted. Imagine being a child shivering by a brazier told that your flame kept the darkness polite. Scholars argue about how often these churchyards were truly havens against wolves. Some sources describe wolves pacing the very fences drawn by the smell of livestock or the cries of infants. Others insist wolves rarely pressed so close, preferring forest to consecrated ground. Environmental historians point out that churches were usually built near the village centre, where human density itself discouraged predators. Folklorists, however, treasure tales of priests flinging holy water from the porch to banish a circling pack. Whether history or exaggeration, the imagery lingers, the clash of sacred bells and feral howls echoing across snow. The convoy approaches the gate. A man in a thick fur cloak waves, shouting over the wind. The gates creak open wide enough for sleighs to slide through. Horses snort in relief as they pass from road to churchyard hooves, clattering on frozen ground tamped firm by countless feet. Lanterns here shine steadily, fed by oil, their flames steady as librarians' hands. You breathe easier, though your breath still fogs like anxious punctuation. Inside, the churchyard bustles with weary order. Two women carry buckets of water from a well-steam curling above the rims. A boy tends one of the braziers, prodding embers with a stick, his face orange in the glow. Old men stand by the door, staves in hand, watching the snow as though it owed them an explanation. The bell continues to toll above slower, now each note heavy with finality. Pavel guides the troika to a halt near the stockade wall, and Semyon follows. The firewood driver nearly collapses with relief, slumping forward as though the church itself lifted weight from his shoulders. Leonid swings down his boots, thudding, and claps one of the guards on the shoulder. "Wolves," he says simply. The man nods grimly. "We heard them." He points toward the woods. "They'll wait. They always wait." A modern aside taps your shoulder. It feels like pulling into a dimly lit gas station, in a snowstorm relief washing over you at the sight of fluorescent lights, even though you know the coffee inside is burnt and the bathroom questionable. Safety is relative, but tonight, relativity is welcome. You climb from the sleigh boots crunching, and the sudden warmth of the braziers hits your face. Your scarf softens damp with melting frost. The dog shakes snow from his coat, scattering it like confetti, then stations himself by the gate, as if appointed captain of security. Horses droop tails, still swishing, but more out of habit than nerves. Fact for the ledger. Russian winter nights often turn churchyards into impromptu inns. Travellers huddled in sleighs near braziers, sometimes welcomed into side buildings, or even the nave itself when frostbite threatened. Priests offered hot kevers or thin gruel, not from abundance, but from the obligation of hospitality. Parish life was communal, and a stranger at the gate was rarely turned away. To refuse warmth was to risk sin. Quirky tidbit travellers sometimes carved their names or initials into the wood of the church gate or stockade small graffiti to prove they survived the road. Some of these carvings survived centuries now, catalogued in dusty ethnographic collections, evidence that fear left marks not only in memory but in timber. You consider scratching your mittened initials into the gate, but decide survival itself will be signature enough. Scholarly debate surfaces once more, were these safe havens universally available, or did they vary by wealth and parish size? Some argue only larger villages had the resources to maintain fires and guards through the night. Others counter that even the poorest communities made do pooling meagre wood to keep a flame alive. The truth may be in the middle fire, as symbol as much as barrier. Tonight the braziers roar with confidence, but you suspect their woodpile is not infinite. As you stand near the fire, watching sparks ascend, A shadow passes over you, not wolf, not bandit, but the sudden realization that outside the stockade in the white fields beyond the lantern, Glowhunger still paces. Wolves do not vanish simply because you stepped inside a fence. They wait, they calculate, and dawn, though promised by bells, is still hours away. The bell above strikes again, and this time the tone resonates through your ribs like an organ note. Relief is real, but it is temporary. Wolves and hunger and winter are patient accountants, and you are still in their ledger. The priest emerges from the church robe, heavy breath-fogging eyes reflecting firelight. He raises a hand in blessing over the travellers, the horses, even the firewood. His voice carries words you can't quite hear, but the cadence is steady, rhythmic, lulling. For the first time tonight you feel your eyelids tug downward, not by fear but by fatigue. And yet, just as the warmth settles into your bones, Ryab growls again. Not loud, just a reminder. The gate creaks faintly in the wind. Beyond it the snow whispers. The wolves have not forgotten you. But the next duty was even stranger. Inside the churchyard, warmth is relative. The braziers glow, smoke drifts from the chimney, and the stockade keeps the night at arm's length. But you know the forest has not abandoned its arithmetic. Wolves don't need gates, they need patience. And hunger has patience in abundance. The priest ushers you and the others toward the entry hall, a low wooden structure attached to the nave. Its walls creak in the wind logs frosted at the seams, but the doorway radiates heat like a promise. Horses are led to a side enclosure, their heads immediately lowering into hay racks, steam curling off their backs. Ryab refuses to enter with the animals, instead stationing himself at the gate once more, tail a metronome of suspicion. Inside, the air is thick with smells that nearly undo you. Smoke, wax, cabbage stew, the faint tang of dried fish. The scent of humanity dense and lived in is strangely comforting after so many hours of snow and silence. Wooden icons hang on the walls, their gilded halos dulled by soot. A few villagers sit near the oven, faces half hidden under scarves, staring at the newcomers, with the slow curiosity of people who have seen many travellers and trust none until dawn. Mainstream historical fact, parish churches in rural Russia often doubled as community shelters during winter nights of danger. Records describe villagers sleeping packed together on floorboards, the church stove blazing to keep frost at bay. Travellers were not turned away both out of Christian duty and practical necessity. Closing doors in winter was a kind of violence. The sanctuary was not luxurious, a bench a corner near the oven, maybe a ladle of thin kashar. Yet to peasants who had trudged miles through frozen forests it was wealth beyond compare. Quirky tidbit, some communities believed that wolves would not cross church thresholds even if doors were left open, because the bells themselves cast an invisible circle of protection. There are tales of exhausted peasants collapsing on church steps too weak to enter, and waking untouched wolves pacing just beyond the porch. Whether faith or coincidence, the belief persisted, giving peasants one more reason to ring the bells at the first sign of danger. Scholars, of course, disagree. Was this sanctuary universal, or a myth layered over scattered practice? Some argue that rural priests lacked resources to house outsiders, and that most travellers relied on barns or peasants' izbas instead. Others point to consistent references in diaries and folk memory that confirm churches as way stations of survival. As always, history refuses to provide a neat answer. It only offers evidence like embers glowing faintly in the ashes. You sink onto a bench near the oven, feeling heat seep into your bones. Your scarf unwinds, mittens flop in your lap boots, stretch as though grateful. Around you voices murmur in low tones, half lullabies, half confessions. Someone ladles stew into a bowl and presses it into your hands. The broth is thin, but its warmth is worth a crown. You sip each spoonful, a reminder that life is sometimes no more complicated than calories and heat. The priest sits nearby, clasping his hands. He tells a story, not sermon so much as recollection of the famine year, when wolves grew so bold they leapt stockades dragging sheep in broad daylight. Of men forming hunting parties, walking into the forest with poles and muskets, only to find the packs melting away like mist. They are clever, he says, but not always cruel. They take when hunger drives, not for sport. His voice carries no anger, just weary respect. A modernist side creeps into your thoughts. It feels like listening to a neighbour complain about raccoons raiding the trash bins, except here the raccoons have better coordination and sharper teeth. You smile, despite yourself, spoon clinking softly against the bowl. The stew gone, fatigue folds over you like a second cloak. Around you, villagers stretch out on benches, cloaks doubled as blankets. The fire pop's icons gleam dully. The bell outside tolls once more. The rhythm is slower now, no longer urgent, just marking time. But even in this warmth, unease lingers. Through a small slit window you see the snow still falling endless, and beyond it the dark. You imagine wolves circling silently outside the stockade, yellow eyes catching stray sparks from the braziers, waiting for silence, for doors to close, for lights to fade. Wolves have no respect for fatigue. You set your bowl aside and curl into the bench boots still on cloak pulled tight. The oven's warmth strokes your cheek, your eyes droop, and just before sleep drags you under, you hear it again, low, mournful, deliberate. A howl. Not far, not near, just close enough to remind you. The priest's voice drifts across the room, calm but unyielding. Sleep now, wolves wait, but so do bells. And the bells toll again, steady as if promising to stay awake while you cannot. But the next duty was even stranger. You wake not because of silence, but because of noise. A scraping, steady, rhythmic metal on woodwood on stone. At first you think it is only the oven settling the stove bricks, groaning in their heat. But the sound continues, insistent, too deliberate. Around you, villagers stir under blankets, blinking, muttering. A child whimpers, quickly hushed. The priest is already standing, his robe heavy with frost, from the doorway, eyes turned toward the gate. The scraping grows louder, then pauses, then resumes. Something testing, something prying. The dog barks a sharp, clipped alarm that slices through the drowsy haze. He is at the stockade again, tail rigid, body taut. The horses in their enclosure begin to stamp, tossing heads, bells jangling in nervous counterpoint. The fire outside hisses in the snow sparks scattering. You rise from the bench boot, stiff cloak heavy. Stepping to the narrow window, you peer into the night. Snow still falls thick as wool, cloaking everything in soft deception. The braziers glow in their circles, smoke rising into the wind. And just beyond the fence, dark shapes move low, deliberate circling. Not men, wolves. Mainstream historical fact, wolf raids on villages, though less common than law suggests, did occur during famine years. Parish records from the 18th and 19th centuries note wolves breaching stockades to carry off dogs, goats, even sheep from yards. In 1878, one provincial governor's report described packs entering hamlets in broad daylight driven by starvation. These weren't nightly occurrences, but when they happened, they burned into memory deep enough to echo in folk tales for generations. Quirky tidbit villagers sometimes placed tarred ropes or strips of cloth around fences, believing the smell deterred wolves. Others hung strings of rattling metal scraps to spook predators at night, a rustic form of alarm system. Some even left sacrificial meat scraps outside the boundary, hoping to buy peace. Folklore claimed wolves respected such payments, though pragmatists argued it only whetted appetite. Tonight no such offerings burn on the snow. The wolves are not here to negotiate. Scholars still argue how much folklore exaggerated these incidents. Were wolves truly bold enough to test fences with teeth and paws, or did terrified villagers interpret shadows as sieges? Some ethnographers claim many of these raids were wolves scavenging already dead livestock. Yet first-hand accounts from priests and travellers are harder to dismiss. Men not prone to fantasy wrote plainly of wolves circling, pacing, probing for weakness. You stand now at the slit window watching the dark lean closer and realise the old arguments don't matter. In this moment belief has four legs. The scraping resumes claws on wood, teeth on timber. The dog snarls, body lunging against the gate as if daring it to fail. The villagers tense, some clutching staffs, others crossing themselves, one fumbling with a musket. The priest's voice cuts through the rising panic bells. At once a boy sprints to the rope, tugging with both hands. The belfry awakens, bronze rolling into the night, heavy and commanding. The toll fills the yard, fills your ribs, spills over the fence into the forest. And the wolves answer. Not in fear, at least not yet, but with howls that braid together into a chorus, weaving around the bell's voice. It is as if the night itself is divided into two choirs, the church's measured clang, and the wolves' wild harmony. Each note collides in the snowy air, reverberating, shaking the stockade. Horses scream and kick. Villagers tighten their grips. A modern aside intrudes. It's like setting off a fire alarm in the middle of a rock concert. Everyone is loud, but no one is listening. You half expect the wolves to hold up lighters in appreciation. The priest begins to chant under the bell words, rising and falling in a rhythm older than the church itself. Some villagers join, voices shaky but determined. Human sound piles onto human sound, layering protection, defiance, desperation. The stockade quivers with the storm of noise. Another fact, wolf bounties in Tsarist Russia were sometimes paid not just for pelts, but for proof of ears or tails, encouraging relentless hunting. In lean winters, entire communities joined drives pushing wolves into killing grounds. Yet even with such campaigns, wolves endured adapting, retreating, returning. They were part of the landscape's arithmetic, subtracted 1 year, multiplied the next. Tonight you feel the centuries of that struggle condensed into a single hour, every howl a reminder that history is not ink but breath. The scraping stops. For a long moment only bells and howls fill the night. Then a thump against the gate, heavy, deliberate. The wood groans. The dog leaps, snapping his barks, now frantic. Another thump. Snow slides from the fence beams. Someone cries out. The boy on the bell rope falters, hands blistering, but the priest barks at him to continue. The bell's voice wavers, then steadies, booming louder. You grip the bench near the window, knuckles pale inside mittens. Every sound sharpens claws on wood bells above the hiss of snow, the thunder of your pulse. The wolves are testing the line between story and siege, and in that moment you realize the night has shifted again. No longer a road, no longer a chase, this is a standoff. The village, the church, the wolves all bound into the same tale, each waiting to see which voice will break first, bronze or hunger. The gate shudders once more. You feel the vibrations through the wall. The dog's snarls merge with the bell human chant, colliding with animal chorus. The snow thickens, turning the world into a stage without backdrop. And then in the chaos of sound, a new noise emerges, not claws, not bells, not voices. A horn, low, brassy, unmistakably human, blowing from beyond the tree line. The villagers freeze, the wolves fall silent, even the bell seems to pause mid-swing. Another presence has entered the story, but the next duty was even stranger. The horn note hangs in the snowy air, low and wavering, as if the forest itself has decided to speak in brass. For a moment no one moves. The dog stops barking, mid-growl, hackles still raised, but ears swivelling toward the sound. Horses sweating despite the cold stand, rigid nostrils flaring steam. Villagers glance at one another, uncertainty heavier than the snow piling on the stockade roof. Wolves know how to howl. Wolves know how to scrape prowl and wait. Wolves do not know how to blow horns. Pavel is the first to speak. Not wolves, he says flatly. He does not sound relieved. His hand rests on the troika's yoke like he is grounding himself against wood. Leonid shoulders the musket that had disappointed him earlier, muttering something sharp under his breath. The priest makes the sign of the cross not as ritual but as habit, as if unsure whether this new sound is salvation or complication. The horn sounds again clearer now, a long blast, then 2 short ones like some forgotten code. Beyond the stockade lanterns flicker through the trees orange dots weaving slowly closer. You count them 1, 2, 3, 4 and feel a prickling in your scalp. Lanterns can mean safety, lanterns can also mean trouble. Mainstream historical fact. Russian winter nights weren't just haunted by wolves, they were also patrolled by Cossacks' local militias, or even bands of conscripted peasants pressed into duty for wolf drives. Armed with rifles, spears and horns, these groups pushed predators into rings for slaughter. Horns signalled movement, coordination or alarm human sound to answer animal sound. In theory, such patrols kept roads safer. In practice, they sometimes blurred into intimidation, especially when authority was more interested in control than protection. Quirky tidbit, there are records of travelling entertainers skomoroki, wandering between villages even in winter, carrying horns, drums and fiddles. They were equal parts musicians, clowns and news carriers, tolerated by some parishes, shunned by others as sinful vagabonds. Stories tell of skomoroki imitating wolf howls on horns to spook villagers for amusement, only to be run off with broomsticks. Tonight you'd pay dearly not to discover jesters lurking in this storm. Scholars argue whether winter patrols truly protected peasants or were symbolic theatre. Some provincial governors boasted of organised drives complete with horns and drums, yet parish accounts suggest wolves still appeared where they pleased. Others note that the noise of patrols may have frightened wolves temporarily, but did little to reduce long-term populations. The debate lingers, were horns a genuine defence, or just a bronze placebo for frightened villages? You stand by the window, listening to the approaching blasts and realise you're about to find out firsthand. The lanterns draw nearer, bobbing against the black lattice of trees. Figures resolve men in heavy coats, fur hats, pulled low, each carrying a pole rifle or torch. Their boots crunch in unison deliberate. At their centre, one man carries a horn as long as his arm, its bell wrapped in cloth against the cold. He raises it once more, blows, and the note rolls across the snow like a second bell. The wolves answer with a scattered chorus, no longer confident. The sound of hunger collides with the sound of order, and for once order does not flinch. The villagers relax slightly. The priest opens the gate with a creak, letting the patrol file into the yard. Sparks fly as their torches shake off snow. The leader nods curtly, his beard a frozen sculpture. Wolves, he says not as question but fact. His men spread out, stationing themselves near the fence. The dog greets them with suspicion, tail low but steady, then returns to his post, unwilling to outsource vigilance. Pavel exchanges a glance with Semyon. Neither looks wholly reassured. Wolves are one problem, men are another. Authority, even when dressed as rescue, brings its own arithmetic. The patrol leader notices their stares and smiles humorlessly. "You travel late," he says. Not wise. But tonight we heard them back. He gestures toward the dark beyond the stockade. Better to chase than be chased. A modern aside slinks into your mind. It's like when the police arrive after a loud noise at night. Relief, yes. But also the awareness that you're no longer just a witness. You're part of a report. You half expect someone to ask for your sleigh registration and a small fee for lantern upkeep. One of the patrolmen drives a stake into the snow outside the gate, hanging a lantern from its top. Another does the same to the right, creating a corridor of light stretching into the forest. The horn sounds again, a brief commanding call, and the wolves answer with uneasy howls farther away. The pack has shifted, calculating anew. Historical footnote: some wolf drives used fire noise, and men in long lines to funnel predators into nets or toward shooters. The tactic was brutal but effective, though not always wolves learned, adapted, vanished into deeper forests. Tonight feels like a miniature of that strategy improvised in the dark. Bells, horns, braziers, all tools of sound and light, not just to comfort humans, but to convince wolves that math was against them. The patrolmen spread through the yard, stamping feet, tightening mittens, checking weapons. The horn hangs silent for now, waiting for its next line. The priest leads a short prayer, half drowned by the wind. You sit on your bench, mittens, clasped stew still warm in your belly, and feel the strange layering of sound bells above horns, below wolves, circling men muttering. The night has become an orchestra no one asked to conduct. Then from the forest a single howl rises, long, mournful, almost beautiful. Another joins, then silence. The patrol leader tilts his head, eyes narrowing. They test, he says. He lifts the horn to his lips again, but before the blast comes, Rajab growls low and long, staring not at the trees but at the road leading farther north. Lanterns, wolves, bells, horns, all arranged neatly on the board, and yet the dog insists the real story lies somewhere else, just beyond the road, where the snow folds into shadows you haven't looked at yet. But the next duty was even stranger. The patrolmen follow Ryab's gaze. The dog stands stiff tail level, every hair-bristling nose pointing down the north road as if it were an arrow. His growl rolls like a low drumbeat, steady, unwavering. For a moment all other noise seems to hush the bells above the mutters of villagers, even the restless shuffle of horses. The only sound left is the snow whispering as it falls, landing soft on wood fur and faces. Lanterns swing as men turn. Beyond the stockade, the north road stretches into a tunnel of white flanked by skeletal birch trees. At first it looks empty, just snow and shadow. Then something moves. Slow, deliberate, large. A dark bulk, almost shapeless in the blizzard, trudging toward the parish. The patrol leader lowers his horn eyes, narrowing. Not wolf, he says. His men raise their rifles all the same. The shape lumbers closer. Lantern light catches it, revealing broad shoulders, fur piled high, and a face hidden beneath a hood crusted with frost. A man. Alone. Dragging a crude sled behind him piled with what looks like firewood and wrapped bundles. The runners squeal faintly on the hard snow. He walks with the mechanical precision of someone who's been moving too long, and knows that stopping means surrender. The priest signals and the gates creak open just enough for the figure to step through. He does not hurry, he does not stumble. He enters like a shadow allowed in by invitation. When the hood falls back, his face's gaunt beard, rimed white eyes, hollow but still alert. He nods once to the priest, once to the patrol, and then sinks to his knees beside the brazier, hands extended as if to catch not warmth, but life itself. Mainstream historical fact, lone travellers in Russian winters were rare but not unheard of. Merchants sometimes pressed on despite danger, unwilling to lose profits. Messengers of the Tsar couriers carrying official letters or priests on parish duty braved the roads even at night. The YAM system, the network of relay stations, offered some support, but vast distances meant many miles were still crossed in isolation. Survival demanded stamina, cunning, and a stubborn refusal to stop. Quirky tidbit. There are accounts of peasants carrying small icons on their belts or tied to their sleds, not for devotion alone but for visibility. Tiny painted saints flashing in lantern light, letting other travellers know they were Christian kin, not bandits. One story even describes a man who tied an icon of St. Nicholas to his horse's bridle, claiming the wolves respected the saint and kept their distance. Historians suspect the wolves were more respectful of the man's whip and speed, but the image of a horse wearing a saint like a badge of office is too charming to dismiss. Scholars debate how often lone travellers survived such nights. Were they exceptions written into memory because they defied the odds, or were they more common than later narratives admit? Some argue that exaggeration made their feats legendary, while others point to consistent records of couriers and priests making solitary journeys, proof that solitude was not always suicide. The truth as ever sits between survival, balanced on preparation, stubbornness and luck. The man at the brazier does not speak at first. He merely stares into the coals as if words must thaw before leaving his mouth. When finally he does, his voice is hoarse but steady. "North Road," he says. "Dead horse. Sledge broken. Wolves feeding." He lifts a hand, points past the trees. His eyes do not waver. A ripple passes through the gathered men. The patrol leader grimaces. "Then they are bold tonight," he mutters. "They eat within a verst." He glances at the horn, then at the bell tower above, then at the priest. "We must hold till morning." The priest nods gravely. Dawn scatters them. Until then we do not scatter ourselves. His gaze sweeps over the villagers, the travellers, even you, as if appointing everyone guardian of the night. The dog growls again, this time softer, pacing by the gate as if he wants to both rest and patrol. The villagers whisper, some crossing themselves, others muttering prayers. The patrolmen check their weapons, stamping frost from their boots. The lone traveller finally lowers himself onto the ground cloak, wrapped tight, exhaustion pulling at his bones. He has delivered his message. Now he waits like everyone else. A modern aside slips in. This feels like being stuck in an airport terminal at 3 a.m. after your flight has been delayed indefinitely. Everyone is strangers, everyone is tired, and everyone is watching the same departure gate with dread. Except the departure gate here might have teeth. Another fact: in certain winters' villages recorded nights when wolves grew so audacious they lingered just outside stockades until dawn, eyes glowing in firelight, howling in chorus with church bells. Peasants called it the Siege of Hunger. Such events became stories retold for decades, proof of both human endurance and the relentlessness of nature. Tonight you realize you're sitting inside one of those stories. The horn sounds again, deliberately, its low moan, stretching across the snow. The wolves answer closer this time, their howls circling, weaving through the bell's heavy toll. The dog stiffens, hackles bristling. Men grip weapons tighter. The priest bows his head, lips moving. And you, wrapped in furs by the oven's warmth, cannot shake the sense that you are trapped between two choirs, one of iron, and faith the other of hunger and teeth. Both will sing until dawn decides which voice prevails. But the next duty was even stranger. The night inside the churchyard stretches into something that feels less like hours and more like a negotiation. The wolves outside pace in silence, broken only by occasional howls, as though they too are listening to the bells, weighing the cost of patience against the reward of daring. The horn sounds at intervals steady, and measured, a human declaration that the village is not abandoned, not forgotten. Each blast rolls outward into the forest, threading with the deep voice of the church bell, weaving a tapestry of warning. You sit near the oven, scarf loosened, now mittens steaming gently from melted frost. Around you villagers and travellers drowse in uneasy postures, some upright against walls, others sprawled on benches, one boy curled beside the stove like a cat. The priest moves among them, murmuring blessings, his own eyes rimmed with sleeplessness but steady. The patrolmen lean on staves or rifles, stamping their feet, breath pluming in lantern glow. And always the dog Rajab, pacing between door and gate, never still more than a heartbeat. His devotion is a rhythm of its own. Mainstream historical fact: wolves were not the only threat in these frozen villages. Disease, hunger and isolation often cut deeper than fangs. Records from the 18th century show entire hamlets vanishing not to predators, but to famine winters where grain, failed firewood ran out, and people succumbed to cold in their beds. Yet wolves became the symbol, the external embodiment of hunger that villagers could point to curse and defend against. Bells rang against wolves because bells could not ring against famine. Quirky tidbits: some villages kept carved wooden wolf heads mounted on gates or rooftops painted red or black as talismans. Folk belief held that displaying the likeness of a predator turned its spirit away, confusing real wolves into thinking the territory already belonged to their kind. Ethnographers recorded instances where children played around such carvings, daring each other to touch the painted teeth for luck. It was both fear and game ritual and entertainment. Tonight no carving hangs on the gate, only the real thing waiting beyond. Scholarly debate persists about how symbolic wolves truly were in Russian peasant imagination. Folklorists argue that wolves acted as narrative shorthand for chaos and famine, not just animals, but allegories. Environmental historians push back, noting that wolf populations waxed and waned with ecological shifts, and real encounters were frequent enough to justify the fear without allegory. Both may be right. Wolves were teeth in the dark and metaphors in the hearthside tales, and here pressed against oven heat with wolves pacing outside metaphor feels less useful than the actual timbre of your heart. Outside, the patrol leader raises his horn again. This time he produces 3 short blasts, sharp and clipped. From the woods comes no howl, no growl, only silence. The men glance at one another uneasily. Silence from wolves is not comfort, it is calculation. You rise, moving to the narrow slit window. Snow still falls, but lighter now, drifting like sifted flour. The trees stand black and still. The lanterns strung on poles throw long yellow paths across the ground. For a moment nothing moves. Then a flicker, not eyes, not fur, a shape darting between trees, then another, then gone. The wolves are shifting, not gone. The priest joins you, his breath fogging the glass. They wait for dawn, he whispers, or for us to sleep. His gaze lingers on the road leading north where the lone traveller had come. Hunger walks farther this winter than most. His words are half observation, half warning. A modern aside tickles your tired brain. It feels like a night shift in an office where everyone's waiting for the system to crash. You keep sipping coffee, refreshing screens, pretending control, while the real problem hums just outside your reach. Wolves are better at suspense than any IT outage. The oven crackles, someone snores. The bell above tolls again slower as though it too is weary. You imagine the ringer's hands roar on the rope gloves, stiff with ice bodies swaying with each pull. The effort becomes music. Fact for the ledger, wolves rarely stormed stockades en masse, no matter how the tales painted them. They tested edges, snatched dogs, worried livestock, but full assaults were rare. Yet memory inflates those rare moments into epics, because when fear wins, once it writes itself larger than all the nights when nothing happened. History remembers teeth more than silence. Another quirky tidbit: peasants sometimes told of wolves sitting in neat rows just beyond the firelight, watching like an audience at a play. Such tales may be exaggeration, or may reflect real animal curiosity. Wolves are clever, they observe. To see them as spectators in the dark was to grant them too much humanity, or to recognize an unsettling kinship. Tonight, when the howls fall silent and the woods seem full of unseen eyes, you feel the truth in those stories. The patrolmen whisper of lighting a second fire outside the gate to push the wolves back, but wood is scarce. The priest shakes his head. We burn what we need for our people, he says, not for theirs. His logic is unyielding. The men fall silent. Time creeps. You measure it in bell strokes, in horn calls, in the dog's barks. At some point you realize you're dozing against the wall, scarf-slipped eyelids heavy. In your half-sleep the sounds blur, bells become howls. Howls become chanting, becomes the crackle of firewood. Dreams tangle with reality until you are unsure whether you hear wolves outside or only the memory of them. Then a sudden noise rips you awake, a bang against the stockade, sharp splintering. Shouts erupt. The dog barks madly, claws scratching at the gate. Villagers scramble, patrolmen grab weapons, the horn blares one long note. Snow shakes from beams as another thump follows heavier, closer. The wolves are not gone. They have chosen their hour. And as the gate groans under impact, you understand the bells may mark time, but hunger refuses to wait for dawn. But the next duty was even stranger. The horn still echoes in your chest when the gate shudders again, not from wolves this time, but from men pulling it open. The patrol leader barks, orders his voice sharp as splitting ice. 2 guards step outside, torches, high lanterns swinging. Snow swallows them almost instantly, their silhouettes dissolving into the storm. You hear boots crunch, then muffled calls, then silence. Riyab paces, whining low, torn between duty at the hearth and loyalty to the hunt. The villagers crowd near the slit windows, murmuring, some crossing themselves, others whispering old charms against forest spirits. The priest holds up a hand, steadying the room with calm he does not entirely feel. His words are soft, but they settle like warm cloth. Fear does not open doors. Fear only lets the dark in. He nods to the bell ringer above, and once more the bronze voice rolls outward, slow measured like a heartbeat promising continuity. Mainstream historical fact during official wolf drives, horns and bells work together. Bells marked the stationary centre, the safe zone, the rallying point, while horns coordinated the moving line of beaters hunters or patrolmen. The noise was strategy, a web of sound that pushed wolves where men wanted them. Yet folklore preserved a different interpretation that bells themselves had power, casting a sacred circle wolves dared not cross. For villagers, the line between tactics and magic blurred until both were true. Quirky tidbit, in some communities, wolf hunts ended with feasts where hunters mockingly toasted the wolves, raising cups to the very animals they had just slaughtered. The gesture was part respect, part warding, acknowledging that wolves were neighbours of a sort, dangerous but necessary. Some hunters even wore scraps of wolf fur in their hats afterward, a token of courage, and perhaps a reminder of who might be wearing human fur if luck had tilted differently. Scholarly debate continues about how effective these drives were. Provincial governors boasted of hundreds of wolves killed in single campaigns, but modern historians suspect the numbers were inflated to justify expenditures. Archaeological surveys suggest wolf populations recovered quickly resilient in the face of human assaults. Some scholars even argue that the spectacle of drives served more to reassure frightened peasants than to eliminate predators. The wolves were never truly gone, just quieter until the next winter's hunger. Back in the yard, the patrol leader re-enters, brushing snow from his beard. They're circling wider, he reports, not retreating, testing. His voice is flat, but his eyes flick to the lone traveller, the man with the broken sled who still kneels by the brazier. The traveller meets his gaze, nods once, then mutters, "I saw them feeding. They will not leave meat unfinished." The implication is clear: if wolves are near a kill, they'll stay until their hunger is satisfied, or until something stronger drives them off. The priest exhales his breath, fogging the lamp glow. "Then we endure till dawn," he says. "The bell will not sleep." He gestures upward. The ringer, pale-faced but determined, tugs again at the rope. The bell answers with another booming note, shaking frost from beams. A modern aside drifts in like a guilty thought. This is the overnight shift at the world's bleakest hotel. The amenities include stew-shared benches and the constant threat of teeth. Room service is just a boy yanking a rope above your head, reminding you that at least you still have ears to hear with. Fatigue presses on you heavier than your fur cloak. Yet the noise outside keeps you awake, the shuffling of boots, the sharp cracks of ice, the occasional low, mournful howl rising from the forest. Each sound is a pinprick stitching you to the night. Around you, some villagers nod off despite themselves, heads bobbing, breath whistling. Sleep is not choice but surrender. You envy them even as you fear their trust. Fact for the ledger dawn often brought relief, not because wolves disappeared entirely, but because daylight shifted the balance of vision. Wolves relied on night's cover. Daylight made them cautious. Records from parish reports note that packs withdrew at first light, returning to deeper forests, leaving behind trampled snow and the remnants of kills. The rising sun was as much a weapon as fire or iron, but dawn is still hours away. The horn sounds once more 3 sharp notes, and the wolves answer with silence, then a howl so deep it rattles the window frames. Rajab snarls paws, raking the threshold. The patrolmen brace spears against the gate. The bell tolls again, iron battling hunger, and in that clash of sounds you sense it this night will not end in silence. Something must break before the morning comes. But the next duty was even stranger. The hours crawl. Snow thickens again, muffling the world until even the patrolman's boots crunch like whispers. The bell continues its measured toll, the horn answers at intervals, and between them hangs the restless quiet of wolves. You sit against the wall, cloak, heavy eyelids tugging downward, yet every thump against the gate, every creak of timber jerks you awake again. Sleep is tempting, but sleep feels like surrender. The priest moves through the churchyard with deliberate calm blessing, each brazier checking each face. He pauses by the gate where Rhiab still stands, sentinel frost glazing the dog's whiskers. The priest kneels, murmurs a prayer, and presses his hand to the animal's head as though sanctifying the one creature who never wavers. Rhiab doesn't blink, doesn't soften his eyes, remain fixed on the snow beyond the stockade where shadows stir and vanish, like ink in water. Mainstream historical fact, parish priests often acted as both spiritual and practical leaders during crises. Records from famine winters describe priests organising night watches, distributing dwindling food stores, even leading hunting parties when wolves grew too bold. The church was both house of God and house of governance. Survival demanded blurred roles. One priest from Nizhny Novgorod famously wrote that to pray for deliverance is good, but to light the fire and carry the staff is better. Tonight the man tending both souls and flames proves the point. Quirky tidbit, in some villages priests rang handbells over livestock pens during wolf seasons, a ritual known as blessing the herd. The idea was not just to ward off predators, but to remind the animals that they were under human protection. Sheep and cows may not have understood theology, but peasants swore the sound calmed them. Imagine sheep chewing hay serenely, while a priest jingles like a living sleigh, half holy rite, half bedtime lullaby. Scholars argue about how much of this practical priesthood was official duty versus local invention. Some historians say priests exaggerated their role in memoirs, painting themselves as heroes to justify their authority. Others point to parish ledgers showing actual expenditures for firewood, guards, and food, shared in the rectory evidence that spiritual leaders were indeed logistical ones. Tonight, the priest's steady hand on a dog's head feels less like myth and more like muscle memory of generations. The horn sounds again, 2 blasts this time. The patrol leader stiffens. They've split, he mutters. He gestures to his men who hurry to the stockade's eastern wall. You follow their gaze through the narrow window. Movement flickers. Wolves grey against white, flowing low across the snow like liquid shadows. They are not charging. They are probing testing angles, looking for weakness. Their howls come in fragments, now short, sharp notes as if conversing in strategy. The villagers stir uneasily. One woman begins to cry quickly, muffled by a neighbour's hand. The boy at the bell rope falters, arms trembling with fatigue. The priest urges him on, and the bell booms again, heavy as iron lungs. Each note shakes frost from the beams, showering the boy's shoulders. A modern aside drifts into your thoughts. It feels like being in a waiting room where the doctor is very late, and the magazines are wolves. Everyone is pretending to be calm, but everyone knows the appointment won't end well. The wolves grow bolder. One leaps onto a snowdrift silhouetted for an instant against the brazier glow, long body ribs sharp under winter fur jaws parted in a silent snarl. Rhiab erupts, barking furiously, body lunging forward until his claws scrape the frozen ground. The patrolmen thrust their torches, higher flames flaring orange against the dark. The wolf drops back into the shadows, but its presence lingers like a fingerprint on glass. Another fact: wolves in Russian folklore were sometimes said to test faith. A common tale told of wolves circling a village during Lent, daring peasants to break their fast early to sacrifice ritual for safety. To share meat or bread with wolves was seen as a bargain, half practical, half blasphemy. Some stories end with villagers saved by offerings. Others end with priests condemning such appeasement as sin. Survival often forced people into theological corners. Quirky tidbit peasants occasionally swore they heard wolves laughing in the woods, their howls mocking bells and human voices. Ethnographers recorded these stories skeptically, but those who lived them insisted it was true that wolves learned to mimic tones, turning the sounds of fear back on their makers. Tonight, as the howls rise in uneven cadence, you can almost believe it. The patrol leader orders a volley. Muskets crack, smoke billows, sparks rain down. The sound rattles through the yard like thunder. For a moment silence follows, then a chorus of howls replies from deeper in the forest, dozens of voices layered mocking. The musket balls may have flown, but the wolves still count themselves unbroken. The horn sounds again, longer this time, the patrol leader's jaw clenched. He glances at the priest. If they rush, we won't hold. His words are flat, not fearful. The priest nods his face, grave. Then we pray louder, and ring louder still. He raises his hand, and the boy on the rope musters strength for another swing. The bell roars again, bronze-defying bone. You close your eyes for a moment, exhaustion crashing over you. Behind your lids you see wolves pacing like figures on a chessboard. Bells swinging like pendulums, men clutching weapons like pens trying to rewrite fate. The night is a ledger, and every sound is another entry. Then the gate rattles once more, not claws this time, not hunger. A knock, slow, deliberate human. The dog barks wildly. The patrolmen raise weapons. The priest freezes hands still mid-blessing. A knock again, 3 times. In a night ruled by wolves and bells, the sound of a human knuckle is the most unsettling noise of all. But the next duty was even stranger. The knock repeats 3 measured raps on the wooden gate. Not frantic pounding, not the scrape of claws, but deliberate, almost polite. The sound freezes the yard more thoroughly than any howl. Villagers stiffen, spoons halfway to mouths, children clutch tighter in shawls. The patrolmen glance at one another uneasily. Even wolves feel expected in winter. A human visitor at this hour feels like a contradiction. The priest raises a hand, calming the murmur. He steps forward, lantern in hand, the flame gilding his face in copper light. "Who comes?" he calls, voice echoing across the snow. Silence answers. Only the crackle of braziers and the low groan of the bell rope above. Rajab snarls, body-rigid ears pinned forward. Then another knock, slow even, as though whoever is outside has all the time in the world. Mainstream historical fact, Russian villages often enforced curfews after dark, especially in winter. Outsiders appearing at night were viewed with deep suspicion. Bandits sometimes used disguises, approaching gates in the guise of lost travellers, only to strike once admitted. Yet there are also stories of genuine wanderers, pilgrims, beggars, or escaped serfs seeking shelter. Villagers stood at a crossroads of duty and danger. To refuse a soul might be sin, but to admit the wrong one could doom them all. Quirky tidbit folklore warned of wolf spirits who could knock like men testing hospitality. These tales blurred the line between predator and guest. Some said refusing such a knock brought curses, others that opening the gate invited ruin. Old charms advised sprinkling salt or ash before unlatching a door so that no spirit animal or otherwise could cross uninvited. Imagine fumbling for a salt sack while claws or fists wrapped politely in the dark. Scholars still argue whether such tales were allegories for banditry or sincere belief in shapeshifters. Folklorists point to consistent motifs of wolfmen testing villages, while historians argue the stories mask the very real threat of organised raiders who used fear to soften defences. Whichever the truth, the echoes now pound against this very gate. The patrol leader gestures sharply. 2 of his men brace their rifles, flanking the priest. Leonid grips his musket tighter, his eyes flicking toward Pavel's troika, as though calculating whether escape would be wiser than hospitality. The priest lifts his lantern higher. His voice sharpens, less welcoming this time. "Speak your name, traveller." For a moment, nothing. Then a voice. Rough hoarse, cracked with cold, but undeniably human. "For God's sake, open! They're out there!" The words stagger on the wind, part plea, part warning. The villagers murmur. A woman begins to sob. The patrol leader scowls, muttering could be trick. Wolves don't beg, but men do. He spits into the snow as if clearing the taste of indecision. The priest's face hardens, and if it is no trick to refuse is sin. He steps closer, hand already reaching for the gate's latch. The patrol leader grips his arm, and if it dooms us all, their eyes lock, centuries of argument compressed into a heartbeat. Duty against fear, law against mercy. A modern aside buzzes into your mind. This is the ultimate nightmare version of answering a doorbell at 3 a.m. Do you open to a lost pizza delivery guy, or do you find out you've invited the villain into your living room? You almost laugh, except your throat is too dry. The priest pulls free. "We open," he says, voice steady. "But we open with witness." He nods to the bell ringer. Another toll resounds louder than before, bronze shaking the night awake. If this is man, he enters under God's sound. If it is beast, it cannot cross. The latch lifts. The gate creaks. Snow gusts in as the door cracks wide. Lantern light spills outward, casting gold on the falling flakes. At first, you see nothing but white and shadow. Then, a figure staggers through. A man wrapped in a ragged furs, face pale, lips, blue eyes, hollow. He collapses just inside the gate, body crumpling like a sack of grain dropped on stone. The villagers rush forward. 2 men drag him toward the fire, his boots scraping furrows in the snow. His hands twitch, clutching at nothing. The priest kneels, pressing fingers to his throat. "Alive," he declares. "By God, alive!" But as they lay him near the brazier, a bundle falls from beneath his cloak. It hits the ground with a muffled thump, straw spills out, and inside something glints. Not wood, not food, metal. The patrol leader kicks it open with his boot. Coins scatter across the snow silver, flashing in lantern light. More than any peasant should ever carry. The yard goes silent. Even the wolves outside seem to pause. The man groans, voice rasping. "Please." I had no choice. They're hunting me. His eyes flick open wide, fevered. Not just wolves, men. The priest frowns, confused. The patrol leader's jaw tightens. Pavel mutters under his breath. And you realize the night has grown heavier. The wolves outside were not the only predators following this road, but the next duty was even stranger. The collapsed stranger lies near the brazier, breath-shallow eyes half closed. His coins glitter where they spilled in the snow small suns that catch every lantern flame. No one moves to gather them. Silver on white feels like bait. The patrol leader scowls, pacing around the man's bundle with suspicion sharp enough to cut the night. The priest kneels, cloak trailing in straw. He presses his hand to the man's brow, then to his chest. Alive, he murmurs again, though weaker now. The man stirs lips, trembling words stumbling free. They followed. Men, not wolves. Bandits. They know I carry it. He gestures faintly toward the coins, his hand shaking. Villagers exchange nervous glances. Wolves at the gate are terror enough, but men with weapons in the woods are a cruelty of another order. The patrol leader growls low. This fool led them here. His men mutter agreement, one even spitting into the snow as though to reject the stranger's luck. Mainstream historical fact, rural Russia in the 18th and 19th centuries was riddled with stories of bandit gangs, especially in famine years. Wolves took sheep, but men took sleighs, livestock, grain and lives. Some bandits disguised themselves as travellers, begging shelter at churches only to attack once inside. Reports describe whole convoys robbed under torchlight bells, ignored prayers unanswered. Banditry was such a chronic issue that officials issued edicts forbidding night travel without written permits. Wolves were predictable, men less so. Quirky tidbit peasants sometimes said wolves and bandits shared a pact, one chased from the front, the other waited at the back. Of course, this was more metaphor than fact, but accounts exist of robberies timed with wolf raids, the chaos masking human theft. Folklore even imagined wolfmen who could summon packs with whistles or mimic howls to direct their movements. Whether truth or embellishment, the idea made winter nights twice as long. Scholars debate whether such tales of wolf-bandit alliances were exaggerations to heighten drama, or veiled ways to discuss collusion between corrupt officials and raiders. Some argue wolves became scapegoats for human crimes, their shadows used to explain what was otherwise shameful. Others point out that fear doesn't need accuracy, only plausibility. And on nights like this, with both howls and horns outside the stockade, plausibility feels too close to reality. The patrol leader kneels by the scattered coins, turning one with the toe of his boot. Too much for a peasant, not enough for a merchant. Where did you steal it? His tone is accusation, not curiosity. The man groans, shaking his head. Not mine. Duty. A collection for the monastery. Taken from villages farther north. They wait for it. He coughs, spitting flecks of ice. But the bandits, they wait too. The priest exhales sharply. His eyes flick toward the church doors where icons gleam faintly in lamplight. If it is truly tithe, it belongs to God, he says. And if thieves pursue it, then God has brought it here for safekeeping. His voice is firm, but his hand trembles slightly on his staff. A modern aside drifts in like a sly guest. It feels like someone dragging a suitcase full of cash into a train station already under siege. Everyone's tired, everyone's hungry, and suddenly the situation smells like a heist movie. Wolves outside coins inside what could possibly go wrong. The dog growls sharply, jerking all eyes back to the gate. Outside, the howls resume louder, this time layered closer, and beneath them, another sound. Shouts. Human voices, ragged but distinct, moving with purpose. The wolves are not alone. Torches flicker beyond the fence, dim in the snow. Figures move, shapes taller, straighter than wolves, carrying light and steel. The patrolmen raise weapons, swearing under their breath. The priest rises lantern high. His voice cracks like frost. Two predators at once. The bell above tolls again, defiant but uncertain. Wolves howl louder, men shout nearer, the horn blares once more. and you, huddled on your bench with straw clinging to your boots, realize the story has widened its jaws. Tonight it is not wolves alone that wait for dawn, but the next duty was even stranger. The torches multiply in the snow. First 3, then 5, then a whole row of them flickering against the dark like a fiery fence advancing toward the churchyard. Wolves melt back into the shadows, their howls thinning into uneasy whimpers. Hunger yields when it senses competition. Yet relief does not rise in you, only a deeper dread. Men with torches are not salvation, they are complication wrapped in flame. The patrol leader curses softly, signalling his men to the wall. Bandits, he spits. I'd take wolves over thieves. At least wolves don't lie. He raises the horn to his lips and blasts 2 long notes a warning. The sound rolls outward defiant, but the torchbearers keep advancing. The priest stands tall near the gate, lantern in one hand, staff in the other. His face is carved in lines of duty. If they are men of the road, we parley. If they are thieves, we resist. He speaks firmly, but his eyes flick to the bundle of coins lying half hidden under straw. The silver gleams faintly stubborn as gilt. Mainstream historical fact. Russian highways in the 18th and 19th centuries were infamous for brigandage. Entire bands sometimes controlled stretches of road demanding payment from travellers. Villagers spoke of the Cherny Dorozhniki black roadmen who appeared out of forests in blizzards, torches, high faces masked in fur. They targeted convoys, church tithes, and even mail carriers. Despite sporadic military crackdowns, the vast distances and endless forests gave such men refuge. Bells could warn of wolves. No bell could ward off men who heard it. Quirky tidbits and brigands mocked villagers by ringing stolen sleigh bells outside stockades at night, a cruel parody of safety. Stories describe frightened peasants opening gates expecting travellers only to find armed men. This habit bled into folklore bells, became ambiguous, sometimes holy, sometimes cursed. Tonight the bells above toll with honest desperation, but outside torchlight suggests another tune. Scholarly debate lingers. Were these bandits desperate peasants driven by famine or hardened criminals exploiting chaos? Some historians stress that hunger made robbers of ordinary men, while others argue organised gangs preyed on villages with ruthless planning. The truth likely split both ways. Starving serfs and opportunistic soldiers turned renegades both found reason to knock at gates in winter nights. The torches halt just beyond the stockade, their flames dripping light into snow. Voices call out, rough, slurred, urgent. Open, brothers. We seek warmth, not blood. Their words carry the false cheer of men who've practiced the script. Wolves howl again from the forest edge as if heckling the performance. The patrol leader shakes his head, jaw set. If they were brothers, they'd have come in daylight. His men mutter agreement, muskets braced on the wall. Rajab barks furiously, claws scraping wood, every hair alive with rage. The priest raises his lantern higher. This is God's house, he calls. If you are honest, you leave your torches and weapons. Enter with prayer, not steal. His voice cuts through the snow like the bell above. A laugh answers low mocking. Prayer won't warm our bones, Father, and wolves don't bow to saints. The torches sway closer. The villagers huddle tighter, eyes darting between priest and patrol. Children cry softly. An old man mutters curses against the night. The stranger with the coins groans on the ground, half conscious, his words tumbling out. They followed me. They won't stop. A modern aside sneaks into your weary brain. It feels like a horror film where the monster splits in two. You thought you were in a wolves at the gate story, but now the director has added bandits with torches, and the budget just doubled. The bell tolls again, iron-defying flame. The patrol leader raises his horn and blasts 3 notes short and sharp. His men shout in unison, a roar of defiance. For a heartbeat, silence falls, the wolves waiting, the bandits weighing, the villagers praying. Then the torches surge forward, light spilling across the snow. The gate groans under sudden impact, and you realize the night has ceased to be a siege of patience. It has become a siege of force. But the next duty was even stranger. The gate booms under the strike snow falling from its beams in clumps, timber groaning like an old man asked to lift too much. Children scream. Horses rear in their enclosure, hooves clattering against frozen ground. The bell above tolls in frantic rhythm, the boy at the rope yanking as though volume alone might splinter the night. Rajab's barking becomes a steady, savage rhythm, his body lunging at the gate with each thud from outside. The patrolmen brace their shoulders against the wood boots digging deep. Leonid snarls musket in hand, though snow-damp powder makes it more club than gun. Pavel grips a staff, his knuckles pale. Semyon mutters curses, half prayer, half threat. The priest raises his staff and slams it against the frozen earth. His voice cuts through panic. Hold, this yard belongs to God, not to thieves. Mainstream historical fact: when villages faced raids, defense often fell, not to soldiers but to whoever happened to be inside the stockade: peasants, priests, travellers. There were no standing garrisons in the provinces. Communities improvised barricades with sleighs, wagons, barrels, or even stacked firewood. Bells rang to summon distant neighbours, though in blizzards no help might come. Winter raids were swift, brutal, and often decided in the first rush. Quirky tidbits: some communities smeared pig fat or tar on gates before winter raids, so that attackers found their grip slipping. Chronicles tell of raiders clawing uselessly at slick timber, while defenders hurled boiling water, hot sand, or even burning straw from above. Crude methods, but effective. Somewhere in the archives is a note about one village throwing old bread soaked in resin. At attackers, desperation cooked into creativity. Scholars debate whether these defences were common or exceptional anecdotes. Some argue that villagers exaggerated their ingenuity in later retellings, turning small victories into epics. Others suggest that improvised tactics were exactly what survival demanded: resourcefulness born of scarcity. Tonight, as you watch men and women brace bare hands against frozen planks, the debate feels irrelevant. Desperation does not wait for consensus. The gate shudders again, this time with more force. The torchlight outside brightens, flaring through cracks. A voice calls, "Give us the silver, and we leave you to your prayers." The stranger on the ground stirs, groaning. His hand claws toward the bundle of coins, feebly pulling it close. "Not theirs," he rasps. "Not theirs." The patrol leader snarls. "We don't bargain with thieves." He nods to his men, who shove heavier timbers against the gate. Lanterns sway, shadows lurch. The priest lifts his lantern toward the villagers. "Stand firm," he urges. Fear feeds wolves and men alike. A modern aside creeps into your tired thoughts. It feels like being trapped in a bank vault while robbers pound the door. Except your vault is made of wood and prayers, and your security system is a boy ringing a bell like a malfunctioning alarm clock. You almost laugh, except fear dries the sound before it leaves your throat. The wolves, pushed aside by human racket, begin to howl again, long shrill, circling the torchlight. The night has become cacophony: bells tolling, wolves keening, men shouting, timber groaning, dog barking. Each sound overlaps until the world is a single deafening chord of survival. The bandits strike again. A plank cracks. Splinters scatter like snow. Villagers cry out. One of the patrolmen jams a spear through the gap, thrusting blindly, rewarded by a curse from the other side. The torches sway back, then forward again. Fact for the ledger: Russian law sometimes punished bandits by breaking on the wheel or exile to Siberia. Yet many return to their old roads, forests offering sanctuary, famine offering recruits. Wolves could be hunted and skinned, but men with nothing to lose were harder to erase. Quirky tidbit: some legends claim churches themselves could swallow stolen goods, making treasure vanish if bandits crossed the threshold. Stories tell of coins hidden beneath altars reappearing only for the faithful. Priests use such tales as deterrent, reminding would-be thieves that God's house was a poor place for loot. Tonight, staring at silver scattered on the floor, you wish such magic were true. The gate booms, once more louder than before. This time the hinges shriek. Snow bursts inward. Torchlight spills through cracks, fiery fingers reaching. The priest raises his staff high, lantern, blazing, his voice thundering over the noise. "This is sacred ground. You will not pass." The patrol leader lifts the horn and blasts a note so loud it rattles your teeth. The wolves howl in reply, circling, emboldened by chaos. For a moment it feels as if the entire night is alive: bells, wolves, men, all shouting at once. And then from the darkness beyond the broken gate, a voice different from the rest calls out low, commanding with authority unmistakable. "Stand down, by order of the Tsar." The torchlight freezes. The shouting stops. Even the wolves fall silent. But the next duty was even stranger. The words strike harder than any ram against timber: by order of the Tsar. They hang in the night air, louder than bells, heavier than snow. For a heartbeat no one breathes. Even the wolves hold their howls as though the very syllables have stunned them. The patrol leader lowers his horn, blinking. The priest straightens lantern, quivering in his hand. The villagers murmur, uncertain. What does it mean that men outside a parish stockade in the middle of a wolf-haunted night claim the Tsar's voice? The gate creaks under one last shove, then goes still. From the narrow crack a figure appears, torch held low, not high. He steps forward slowly, carefully revealing not a bandit's ragged coat, but the uniform of an imperial courier cloak marked with insignia dulled by frost. Behind him, 2 others carry rifles, their muzzles angled down. The torchlight flickers across their faces, hard and weary but not masked in malice. Mainstream historical fact, Tsarist Russia relied on a vast courier network, the Yam, to carry decrees, taxes and news across impossible distances. Couriers travelled in sleighs with bells and official seals, often through wolf-haunted nights and bandit roads. They carried the Tsar's authority like a portable fortress. To interfere with a courier was treason. Their presence at village gates meant more than law. It meant empire intruding on frost and hunger. Quirky tidbits, some couriers carried small bronze plaques inscribed with the double-headed eagle, the Tsar's emblem. Peasants whispered that these plaques frightened wolves as surely as bells did. Of course, wolves knew nothing of heraldry, but humans do symbols have teeth of their own. Travellers claimed the mere sight of the eagle made villagers bow as though the Tsar himself had stepped down from the sleigh. Scholars debate whether imperial couriers were respected or resented in the provinces. Some accounts describe peasants offering food horses and shelter, gladly proud to serve the Tsar's road. Others reveal deep resentment at the burden seeing couriers as one more tax on starving families. Was the courier a symbol of unity, or just another mouth demanding obedience? Historians still argue, but tonight his presence tilts the balance inside this churchyard. The courier raises his hand. His voice is hoarse but steady. There are bandits on the road, wolves in the forest. We ride for Moscow with news from the north. The bell drew us here. He scans the yard eyes, catching the glint of coins on the snow. His gaze lingers sharp, and I see the wolves are not the only ones chasing silver. The patrol leader bristles. We defend this yard, not hoard it. He kicks straw over the scattered coins, covering their shine. The stranger on the ground groans faintly, trying to speak, but his voice is lost in the wind. The priest steps forward, lifting his lantern. If you are who you say, then stand with us. Dawn is near, but not yet. His tone carries both invitation and warning. The courier nods. His men step inside, the gate rifles ready. The torchlight mingles with brazier glow, brightening the yard until shadows retreat. The wolves, discouraged by the sudden reinforcement, slink farther into the trees. Their howls resume, but weaker, resigned. Hunger will not risk this fire. The villagers exhale as one shoulder's lowering. Children uncurl from shawls. Even Rajab relaxes slightly, though his eyes remain fixed on the forest. The bells above toll once more, slower, now less alarm than benediction. A modern aside drifts into your weary mind. It feels like when the backup team finally arrives at a night shift, bringing hot coffee and paperwork. Relief? Yes, but also the knowledge that the night still isn't over. Fact for the ledger, imperial authority could scatter bandits and reassure peasants, but it never erased hunger or wolves. The Empire's reach was long, but not endless. Each village remained an island, each winter a siege. Yet moments like this, when bells fire and strangers combined, were remembered as victories against the dark. The courier lowers his torch, planting it firmly in the snow. His voice, quieter now, carries across the yard. Hold fast, the night is nearly done. And indeed the sky begins to pale. Not much, just a hint of grey on the horizon, a thinning of black. The first whisper of dawn. The wolves fade with it, their howls stretching, thinning, then ceasing altogether. The forest exhales, snowfall softer. The villagers watch in silence as night loosens its grip. The coins lie hidden beneath straw, the stranger lies still. The patrol stands weary but upright, and the bell tolls one last time before quieting. You close your eyes, finally letting your breath ease. The siege is not broken by swords, but by time itself. Dawn has done what fire and bronze could not. The priest lifts his lantern higher, flame trembling in the newborn light. Another night survived, he says. His words settle like a final blessing. But in your bones, you know the wolves have only retreated, not vanished. Winter is long, hunger is patient, the road always waits. The night has ended, yet the story lingers, its edges still glowing like embers cooling in the snow. You feel the weight of it in your shoulders, in your breath, in the way silence now stretches without interruption. The wolves have melted into the forest, the torches have burned low, and the bell has fallen still. What remains is not fear, but a slow, quiet, soft as wool drawn over tired eyes. Imagine the snow now no longer a curtain of threat, but a blanket settling gently over the world. Each flake falls without urgency, without drama, just a patient rhythm covering tracks, covering splinters, covering the night itself. The road that felt endless only hours ago lies hushed, erased a fresh page waiting for the next journey. Inside the churchyard the braziers die down to coals. Their heat drifts lazily upward, less flame, more memory. The villagers who kept watch through the longest hours finally allow themselves to lean into benches to slip into the drowsiness they had fought against. The patrolmen so rigid with readiness slump against the walls, rifles resting idly by their sides. Even the priest lowers his lantern at last, letting its light flicker low, trusting dawn to finish the task. The dog Rajab curls by the gate, eyes finally closed, still vigilant even in dreams. Horses shift in their stalls, tails flicking once before they too surrender to stillness. And you sitting in your cloak, warmed by the oven's last breaths, feel your own body easing. Your pulse slows. Your breath matches the snow's rhythm. The noise of bells and howls has drained away, leaving only the soft hum of sleep. The wolves are gone for now. Dawn has arrived, and your eyes heavy with the story are free to close.